Welcome into another Friday morning episode where Jeff Bell and I go through every single matchup, talking about all the fantasy relevant players, injuries, news, and notes you need to prepare for this weekend of football. Jeff, first things first, we got a football game last night, maybe the worst game we've watched of the year.
Maybe, but the Broncos and the Jets might be the worst game. Or we were talking pre-show. NFL memes had tweeted that the Broncos were involved in the two worst games of the year, and they mentioned the Colts game, not the Jets game. So that tells you, we said the Broncos are the weirdest 7-2 team. Where from the beginning of that game, the fans were booing every time there was a 3-and-out, and I mean they started the game with 3-and-outs. When the Jets game happened, I thought this stuff was intentional by the Broncos in terms of, just kind of playing conservative game plans. I mean, Bo Nix is just the spiritual successor to Russell Wilson at this point. You're nothing through three quarters, and then he turns it on and gives you 28 fantasy points. Last night, they didn't need to do that because the Raiders didn't put him in a position to that. I think unpacking it from the Raiders side, they looked really strong until Jackson Powers-Johnson went out, and that had a real effect on just pass protection and the run game. And
I think the Geno knee injury also was pretty impactful. I mean, he should not have been out there. I don't know why they didn't just put Kenny Pickett out for the final 4 drives.
Yeah, well, there was that, but the Jackson Powers-Johnson happened early in the game, and I know Amazon during the broadcast flashed up basically where Ashton Genty was doing before that injury and then what he did after that injury, and it was a meaningful effect. And I think that that's one thing that we probably could do a better job of when it comes to the fantasy analysis and just in general looking at these games of where the offensive lines stand, because that is so impactful. And, the Chargers have been impacted this year. And so that's part of it. I think from the Broncos side, Troy Franklin, I don't think we wanted to really buy into that probably the beginning of the season or so, but now we're 10 games into the season and he's leading the Broncos in targets, which seemed just crazy to think that might happen 2 months ago.
Yeah. And was just short of a big touchdown, had a really bad, just kind of a ball tracking issue yesterday on a deep shot where he had another catch that he should have had as well. So, I mean, really on the precipice of what could have been a huge game, and he was able to bail himself out with a lone touchdown for the Broncos. But just a weird game overall. Sometimes we get lucky with these Thursday games, and sometimes we get the Broncos and the Vegas playing without any wind in their sails. But such is life. That's the way it goes. Anyway, I want to talk about some bye weeks here. We got some big impactful bye weeks this week: Cincinnati Bengals, Dallas Cowboys, Kansas City Chiefs, and Tennessee Titans. So be sure to get the Bengals, Cowboys, and Chiefs out of your lineups and keep the Titans on your bench exactly where they were last week. First game we want to talk about here, Jeff, Atlanta Falcons at Indianapolis Colts. And as always, what we do on this show is we kind of use the injuries as a jumping off point. Well, there are no injuries for the Falcons right now. All the fantasy relevant players that we care about are healthy in Atlanta. As for the Colts, we had Michael Pittman with a DNP on Wednesday. That was a little bit concerning, but he was able to log a full practice yesterday. So we expect to see him out there. So this is a game with a lot of big fantasy names, and they are all healthy going into this matchup. Jeff, I'm not sure if you saw it, but there's been a lot of debate. Did the Steelers lay the blueprint for how to stop the Colts? And some people are saying yes. What they did is they took away Daniel Jones's first read, and it caused him to panic. And they said that what I've been hearing is that is the same blueprint that worked for stopping Daniel Jones in New York as well. So we saw through the first month and a half of the season, the Colts were looking like one of the best teams in football. Are you a little bit concerned after seeing them sputter last week, also knowing that the rest of their schedule going forward is much harder than it was over the first half of the season?
I think the schedule is the most relevant point because when you look at who they've played previously, I mean, it's really been set up to be able to go on this run. They've arguably played 3 playoff teams or borderline playoff teams. They lost to the Rams, they lost to the Steelers, and realistically, they lost to the Broncos. So that kind of tells you where they stand.
I think they beat the Chargers by 1 point, if I recall, too.
Yeah, right? I guess the Chargers are technically, they're in the playoffs right now. But I think that when you talk about the blueprint of okay, all you need to do is stop Jonathan Taylor, who might be the best running back in football right now, and stop the first read when Daniel Jones has 4 really good targets to go to in the passing game. That's all.
Don't let Tyler Warren get the ball, and don't let Alec Pierce get behind you, and don't let Josh Downs get across the middle of the field. And Michael Pittman, you got to watch him on the boundary as well.
Yes. Meanwhile, you got to stop the best running back in the NFL,
Right.
and that's all you have to do to stop the Colts offense. So certainly, yes. I mean, that's all you need to do to stop the Colts offense. It's one of those that it's like LeBron James. All you need to do is stop him driving down the lane, but he's also the biggest, fastest guy on the court, and he knows exactly where he wants to go. So it's yeah, I hear you. Yes, absolutely. Sure, there's a blueprint to stop the Colts, and I think there's always been a blueprint to stop the Colts. I don't think the Steelers discovered anything. It's just that probably part of it's the schedule, but can you stop Jonathan Taylor, and can you force them to not have an open first read when you've got 4 really strong targets?
So yeah, I mean, we're still starting everybody, right? You're starting Jonathan Taylor, you're starting Alec Pierce. Well, we'll get to Alec Pierce. You're starting Michael Pittman, I should say. Alec Pierce has kind of worked his way into flex consideration. Josh Downs is always kind of in flex consideration. Daniel Jones has been a QB1. And then when you look at the Falcons too, we know that this is one of the most condensed offenses in football. So you're starting Bijan Robinson, you're starting Drake London, you're starting Kyle Pitts. I think it's really as simple as that. Like, I don't know if we're finding gold in this matchup. Like, if you're brave enough to go out there and start a Darnell Mooney or something like that, more power to you. But I think that this is pretty clean on both sides of the ball. We know where the touches are going on both offenses.
Yeah, I do think we need to file an official complaint, because this game being a 9:30 Sunday game, if this were tucked in the 1 o'clock window, we would probably have a wild 38-35 shootout, and every fantasy relevant piece would go off. And then this being a 9:30 game on Sunday morning, it feels like those games are always disjointed and just a mess. And so
right.
I'm sure, like, can we just flip it so like they get Jets Browns or something, and we can have the Falcons Colts in a fun 1 p.m. window?
I remember Bijan did put on a clinic last time he was overseas. He had himself a nice game in England. We'll see if he can replicate that in Berlin. But yeah, a good reminder, Jeff. Thanks for bringing that up. Be sure to set your fantasy lineups. Don't be the guy that puts your commissioner in an awkward spot because you left an inactive player in your lineup. Nobody's questionable for this matchup, but things happen. People travel overseas. They get bugs and whatnot. So be sure to wake up early, be an adult, set your fantasy football lineup. Jeff, anything else on this matchup, or can we move to the next one?
Well, I mean, you just open Pandora's box, and like, people are really like, it's on you if you've started an active player. I'm sorry, like it's on you. Like, nobody should. You do not or message your commissioner and say,
yeah,
I've got an active guy in my lineup under no circumstances.
I think a few years ago we had that Alvin Kamara where he wasn't even on the injury report, and he got sick like the morning of. That was the one time that I understood, like, maybe there could be some, but you should have learned from that lesson. Like, that was the one time we all learned our lesson. There have been 20 plus international games since then. Set your lineup. It's that simple.
Yeah, I think from the Falcons side, it's just been so Jekyll and Hyde on what we get week to week. And it's really Zach Robinson, offense coordinator's under fire. He hasn't been able to go to plan B in his offense on his offensive game plan. And I think from the Colts side, Alec Pierce has been all the talk in fantasy. Alec Pierce has been doing it all year long. And I think the trade of Adonai
Mitchell, not touchdowns. He just has 0 touchdowns, which is very unlike Alec Pierce.
Yes, exactly. And part of me wonders if, Daniel Jones doesn't have a weak arm, but if there's not some deep shots that maybe Pierce has had to come back to the ball instead of the ball being put in front of Pierce, especially from what we saw with Anthony Richardson sometimes last year. And then I think just seeing Adonai Mitchell traded and looking long-term, this is technically on the Dynasty channel. I think Alec Pierce was going to be a free agent following this year. And I think people probably would have been surprised about the contract that Alec Pierce would have been given in the open market. I would be shocked now if Alec Pierce hits the market. And really, it seems like the Colts, he's a perfect complement to a Jonathan Taylor and Tyler Warren offense. And he's kind of moving. He's far from moving in front of Michael Pittman for the best fantasy receiver there, but I think he's moved in front of Josh Downs for the best fantasy receiver there.
Yeah, and I'm sure he'll get something this offseason, like 3-year, $50 million extension, something like that. I expect him to be a part of the Colts' long-term plans here. Now let's go ahead and move on to the next game. New Orleans Saints at Carolina Panthers. And we've got some injuries in this one. Alvin Kamara has been practicing in a limited fashion, dealing with an ankle injury. Taysom Hill still on the injury report with the knee that he's coming back from last year's ACL tear, but he is practicing in full. Rico Dowdle didn't practice on Wednesday with a quad injury. He was limited on Thursday, but as head coach Dave Canal said, they are counting on Rico. He expects to be out there. We expect him to be out there. So, Jeff, I guess we could use Rico Dowdle as kind of the jumping off point for this game. I mean, I've got him inside the top 10, which sounds crazy considering it's Rico Dowdle on the Panthers, and he opened up the year as the backup to Chuba Hubbard. But he has seized this backfield. He has looked great with his opportunities. I think he really just understands how to run behind this offensive line. We've talked about it a lot so far this year, but if you look from the midway point to last year, where he took over the job with the Dallas Cowboys through his starts this year, I mean, he's been an RB1, so I don't think there's any reason to view him any differently than that.
He's my RB5 on the week. And I mean, they're telling you exactly what they want to do. They told you exactly what they wanted to do last week, and they did it. They made Dowdle back into the feature back. They want to run the ball. We know that they want to run the ball. I mean, this is a Saints team that, since they're no longer fun bad, since they benched Spencer Rattler, now they're just bad with Tyler Shuck. They just quit watch, I think, is something that I'm kind of watching this week with. We saw it. We didn't really see it.
We saw it last week with Alvin Kamara.
Yeah, I mean, some of these teams, the Saints, the Jets, they kind of told you what they think about the team right now at the trade deadline. They got rid of some big pieces. I think Rashid Shaheed had been featured the last couple of weeks in that Saints offense. Removing him, I mean, it's going to be there for Chris Olave. It's who else is going to be there? I don't know. Part of me feels
Juwan
like we're
Johnson.
due for.
I think Juwan Johnson's the number 2 in this offense now.
He is probably, and Devon Vele will be on the field. Brandon Cooks has been on the field, and you just found out now that Brandon Cooks has been on the field. So that's kind of tells you the impact that Brandon Cooks has had this year. I think we're due maybe for that Taysom Hill, like 2 touchdown, 80 rushing yards, 30 receiving yards, 50 passing yards, passing touchdown type of a game. Maybe at some point, if it's in there still for Taysom Hill, we're kind of coming to that point. But I think from the Panther side, and really just overall holistically in this game, I mean, you're playing Olave, but from the Panther side, Rico Dowdle, who we start with, and then Tedoroa McMillan. But other than that, I mean, I don't know. I know there's the Jalen Coker hive. I just don't know that there's volume there for a consistent second receiving option with the Panthers, the way that they want to play, and probably the way the Saints will allow them to play this game.
Yeah, you talk about Taysom Hill, and he's a guy that in a lot of deep leagues I did pick up because I don't want to say like quiet quitting, but what we saw from Alvin Kamara last week was bad. I mean, like, he had the fumble in the third quarter. He logged 1 snap after that fumble, and on that snap, it was a missed blocking assignment that became an interception. So, like, just not a good day for Alvin Kamara. And then in between that, they kept flashing to him on the sidelines, and he just like looked despondent, looked like he didn't want to be there, looked like he was just frustrated. And I get it, and that's why I thought that, like, maybe even though that, like, he had shut down any trade concerns, I thought that maybe he would have been somebody who got traded at the deadline. Of course, he didn't. Devin Neal is a guy that I just don't think they want to have to rely on for 3 downs. So if they get to this point where Alvin Kamara just says, you know what, my ankle's bothering me, I'm done. We saw it happen last year, right? In a losing season, Alvin Kamara just kind of took the last few weeks off. I do wonder if that happens again. And if so, I don't think they're going to give Devin Neal a full workload. I think we're going to see like a 50-50 split with Taysom Hill. So definitely a guy worth picking up here. For the Panthers side of the ball, I don't know how much more there is to talk about. Tedoroa McMillan is a guy you're firing up. Xavier Legette, Jalen Coker, you're saying a prayer if you've got them in your lineup, but we don't really feel good about them. Where we were talking about the Falcons, like, we know exactly where the touches are going in that offense. We kind of know where the touches are going in this offense too, both of these offenses. It's just not good offenses. So you're starting Chris Olave, you're taking that pill and you're dealing with it. But overall, this is a game that I think we both have pretty low expectations for.
Yeah, and I think just on the Kamara point, he probably shut down any trade talks by saying, I'll retire if you try to trade me. But at the same time,
pina coladas on the beach is what he said. Yep. Yeah.
You had Breece Hall on the market, and so sometimes what you see the trade market, and especially in like baseball or something like that you'll get like the kind of the top closer that might be available, and then when he moves, then the next tiers would fall apart. I think that there really weren't a lot of suitors probably for running backs. It sounds like maybe the Chiefs were about the most serious suitor for Breece Hall, and Breece Hall is probably going to come in above Alvin Kamara on that conversation. So it's one of those that the market that would be there for running backs wants to see what happens with Breece Hall first before they make a move, and then nothing happens with Breece Hall up to the deadline. If you did want to pivot to Alvin Kamara, you didn't have time to be able to do that. I think it's going to be. Is he going to play next year? I mean, that's probably the biggest question. If he's just at that point of his career, if this is going to be it, part of me thinks that he's at the stage of the career where we see him out there and it still looks like Alvin Kamara in the Saints uniform and the visor and all those things. But like, if he were, like most players would be in like the Jets or Titans uniform at this point, and we'd be
Right.
like, oh, that's not Andre Johnson anymore. That's the guy that's the ghost of Andre Johnson out there. I feel like we're the ghost of Alvin Kamara, but just seeing where the running back market shakes up this offseason is going to be interesting in Dynasty.
Yeah, and I mean, like he looks like it, and I think that's it. Like the eye test, like we've been conditioned to see Alvin Kamara out there for so long that we still think it's the same Alvin Kamara, but fewest yards per route run of his career, fewest yards per reception of his career, fewest yards after contact per attempt of his career, lowest missed tackle rate of his career, and then I mean, just even the raw output. If we're looking at rushing yards per game, receiving yards per game, both the lowest of his career as well. So I said it on a show earlier this week, but Father Time is undefeated, as they say. And I think this year he came knocking for Alvin Kamara. Let's move on to the next one here, Jeff. The Giants at the Bears. Theo Johnson was limited Wednesday with a shoulder injury, but he practiced through that. That's the only real impactful injury for the Giants, who are mostly healthy right now on the offensive side of the ball, if you don't count all the guys that are on IR. For the Bears, though, we've got a lot of injuries to deal with. DJ Moore has been unable to practice, dealing with a hip and a groin injury. Roma Dunze didn't practice Wednesday, was limited on Thursday. Kyle Monungai, limited on Wednesday, full participant on Thursday. DeAndre Swift, limited on Wednesday, full participant on Thursday. Roshan Johnson, who missed last week, has been limited in practice all week. Cole Kmet has been dealing with a concussion, but he passed concussion protocol, so we'll see him out there. And then Luther Burden, also dealing with a concussion, also practicing in full. So a lot of injuries, but it seems like most of these people are trending towards playing. Jeff, I think the biggest conversation we need to have is about the Bears backfield and how you expect this to shake out. It's funny, I've seen so many people saying, like, I think Kyle Monungai earned like a 40% share. That's what he had before DeAndre Swift got hurt. Like, this is already a split backfield, and I'm very confused by this. Like, Kyle Monungai earned work with this big game he had Cincinnati when he was already getting a lot of work out of the bye anyway. I don't think that this backfield is going to flip. Ben Johnson came out and said that DeAndre Swift is still the RB1. This isn't a situation like the Panthers where Chuba Hubbard was running terribly and then Rico Dowdle came out and just like injected them with life. DeAndre Swift was averaging 128 scrimmage yards per game after the bye, scored a touchdown in every single game. DeAndre Swift was playing really good football. They're going to shelf him for a 7th round rookie. I'm sorry, everybody. That's not going to happen.
Yeah, it reminds me a little bit of sometimes you'll see somebody that you can tell they're gearing up because they think they have a big take, and it's been consensus for 3 weeks, and it's you get that sometimes where it's like, well, yeah, Dallas Goedert is a top 12 tight end. We decided that a month ago, but yeah, it's like those types of things. Maybe on the talking about the backfield split, I agree with you too that it's DeAndre Swift's a good football player. The Bears trust him to some extent at least, and they like having that veteran presence there. They like being able to play the two backs. I mean, Ben Johnson had Jahmyr Gibbs and David Montgomery. David Montgomery is a very good football player, but David Montgomery is not Jahmyr Gibbs, and they were still splitting carries really religiously 50-50 in that Lions offense under Ben Johnson. So the idea that, I mean, maybe Monungai can pull slightly ahead, and especially with the injury with DeAndre Swift, but it's probably, my expectation would be best case 50-50 because that's where we saw Ben Johnson land with the Lions backfield. And there's not been, for as good as Monungai was last week, you need to recognize the matchup was a huge part of that, going up against a Bengals defense that's been absolutely horrid. And I think that 50-50 is where they're comfortable.
So let me ask you a question, Jeff. You remember 2022, right? Ben Johnson with the Lions, coaching DeAndre Swift, and Jamal Williams came in there and just stole DeAndre Swift's job. Where do you think DeAndre Swift finished in fantasy that year?
I know through the first 4 games or so, he was like running back 2, and then I think he got hurt and banged up a little bit. And I think he finished maybe running back. I mean, if you're doing points per game or overall points, but probably around running back 10.
Running back 16. Yeah. So, I mean, he was like the per game RB 16 that year. So that's the year that everybody talks about, that like Ben Johnson was done with DeAndre Swift, threw him to the streets. Jamal Williams took over. He's not a normal running back. His ability to hit big plays, the way that he gobbles up targets, he's still going to be fantasy relevant, even if he's just pulling, 55% of the snaps, which is what we saw coming out of the bye. So I'm not panicking about DeAndre Swift. I still have him ranked notably higher than Kyle Monangai. I do think at this point we can kind of rely on Monangai as an RB3, but I think he is a little bit more touchdown dependent, where DeAndre Swift is still going to get 4 or 5 targets. He's going to catch a handful of those. He's going to have the big plays, and I think that's where his value comes from. The other thing I want to talk about with the Bears, of course, is Rome Odunze. We saw Rome Odunze before the bye scoring a touchdown almost every single week, giving us top 5 production, has been held out of the end zone in every game since the bye. And then, of course, last week we see 0 catches on 3 targets. Is it time to panic about Rome Odunze?
I mean, this is the squeakiest wheel game that ever squeaked for Rome here, coming off of the zeros last week, and then the Bears. I mean, I know I think it was James Odunze.
James Odunze, yes, his father.
Yeah.
Yes.
He got a little bit upset on social media, and then the Bears fired back a little bit. And with that video clip of Rome Odunze kind of being very selfless and just doing all the things for the team, there was I don't remember. I apologize, Devin and Phil, but last night on the DFS show, I think it might have been Devin, had some good information about Rome Odunze versus man coverage compared to Rome Odunze against zone coverage. And the Giants are a man-heavy team that Rome Odunze has really ate against man coverage. And so I think this is a good spot for, again, squeaky wheel coverage that has benefited Rome Odunze. Yeah, he hasn't had a touchdown coming out of the bye. He did go over 100 yards 2 weeks ago. And so I do think it's the 0. We tend to have the visceral reaction, especially when we see so many points and so much fantasy goodness come out of that Bears-Bengals game, that when Rome Odunze posts a 0 in that environment, we're going to have a visceral knee-jerk reaction. But the guy had 100 yards the week before that, and he's still the top target for the Bears.
The other thing, too, with Rome Odunze is he's been dropping the ball a lot, and nothing about what I saw in college, nothing that I saw from last year, the first half of this year, makes me think that Rome Odunze is a guy who's going to struggle with drops. They're fluky, and they happen, and sometimes they happen in bunches, but there have just been a lot of weird things happening with Rome Odunze. We had that touchdown that was called back on a ticky-tack penalty in Washington a few weeks ago. Rome Odunze had a dropped touchdown pass last week. Rome Odunze had a drop 2 weeks ago on what would have been like a 35-yard gain down the sidelines. They ran this trick play last week where Cole Kmet threw a pass, hit Rome Odunze in the numbers, and he dropped that as well. So there's been some uncharacteristic drops for Rome Odunze as well, and I don't expect that to maintain over the rest of the year. So, I did a show yesterday with our good friend Mung Song, and we were talking about this Rome Odunze thing a little bit, and he also made a really good point that last week he was facing up against DJ Turner, and we think about all of these different shutdown corners, and DJ Turner doesn't get lumped into that conversation. But if you look at what he has done this year, he has shut down just about every single wide receiver that he has gone up against. So I think it's time that we start looking at DJ Turner in a similar light to how we're looking at, Sauce Gardner and Patrick Surtain, one of these guys that if the wide receiver 1 is facing up against him, we should probably note that in our rankings a little bit. For the New York Giants, Jeff, I think this, for the most part, like Wan'Dale Robinson, kind of starting him as like a gross volume-based wide receiver 2. Darius Slayton, Ray McLeod, if you're in your really deep leagues, there's some volume that could potentially go their way. But I think the backfield here is the biggest thing to discuss. After Cam Scatterbo got hurt, there was hope that Tyrone Tracy would just run away with the job. But we saw a frustrating amount of Devin Singletary last week. Do you expect that to maintain again this week?
Didn't Tracy get dinged up a little bit last week to allow for that Devin Singletary usage? Or
I think it was a lot more the game script. It was like a 3-score game, and I think that's why Devin Singletary kind of came in late. I didn't see an injury, but I might have missed that.
We know that starting out 2024, Devin Singletary had heavy volume that shifted to Tyrone Tracy having heavy volume throughout 2024. And then we saw Cam Scatterbo be a lead back here. I think that it's maybe arguably performance based, and maybe you're dealing with a coaching staff that, because of the very early season comments from Tyrone Tracy, isn't all the way in on Tyrone Tracy at this point in time. Yeah. So that might be factors with that. I think that what we've seen so far from this offense, they would like to have one primary guy, but Devin Singletary is not nothing. I do think we tend to write off these veteran running backs, and I don't think coaches write off veteran running backs quite in the same way that we do.
They've all drafted Devin Singletary. They've spent like 6 seasons together. Like there's a trust there that Brian Daboll has in Devin Singletary.
Yeah, I mean, it was just the most recent example, but like the Bucky Irving, Rashad White thing is like some of it where there's a belief that Bucky Irving just stole that backfield, and the reality is Rashad White was very injured, and they were playing him very injured, and they finally just sat him down at some point. So I think that that's kind of lended to this belief that these rookies can just, or these young players can just take the backfields from these veterans. The veterans tend to play too.
Right. And I remember last year too, like looking back at it, you can look at the end of season finish for Tyrone Tracy and say, like, hey, he was an RB2, and he was on a per game basis. But if you remember the reality of rostering Tyrone Tracy last year, it was a lot of putting him in your lineup and then Devin Singletary getting a ton of work. And then you bench Tyrone Tracy and then he puts up 100 yards and a touchdown. And like, it was a much more frustrating experience rostering Tyrone Tracy last year than looking at the box score might actually imply. So I think we might be headed towards that right now. I mean, to make this actionable, I still have Tyrone Tracy ranked as an RB2 this week. I've got Devin Singletary as kind of a low end RB3. I think you're still starting Tracy where you've got him, but the hopes that he would just take 80% of the backfield touches like Cam Scattaboo did, I don't think that's something that we can rely on.
Yeah, and I mean, you want pieces of this game because we've seen the Bears have
feels like another barn burner.
And part of me is slightly concerned with the Giants offensive or defensive line against a Bears offense that wants to be more run heavy. I mean, you could get in a situation where the Giants defensive line is living in the backfield and shutting down that run game and putting a lot of pressure on Caleb Williams, and whether or not Caleb Williams is up to delivering in that. And then you kind of get Jackson Dart. I said that Bo Nix is the spiritual successor to Russell Wilson to start the show. To me, Jackson Dart feels like a little bit of the spiritual successor to Tim Tebow, where it's like hits the big plays, gets the running production, but it's not exactly what you think an NFL quarterback should look like at every single moment of every single game. But it works great for fantasy. Weather too might be the thing here. I mean, it's going to be cold, maybe some precipitation. We're getting to that point of the year, and it's going to be a real reminder, or it's going to be a real reality check this game and then the Packers game too, that it's cold in the Midwest this weekend.
Yeah, my favorite thing to do before the trade deadline is just flip the wide receivers I have for running backs in trades where I can, because we see this every single year as the weather turns. Teams start to lean on the run a little bit heavier. We see these cold football games, and that's what I've been trying to do right now is turn a lot of my wide receiver twos into RB2s. And I think that's just a good practice to do at like the midway point of the season every single year. But I think that'll do it for this game. Let's move on to the next one, the Jacksonville Jaguars at the Houston Texans. Brian Thomas Jr. obviously not practicing, dealing with an ankle injury, a low grade, high ankle sprain, which is much better than a high grade, low ankle sprain for anybody who's confused at home. Diami Brown has been in concussion protocol, but he cleared that yesterday, so he'll be out there. Hunter Long isn't practicing, dealing with a hip and a knee injury, so they're already down Brenton Strange. Now they're down Hunter Long as well. We'll talk about that. The Jaguars obviously traded for Jacoby Myers, which we will talk about. On the Texans side of the ball, Nick Chubb didn't practice Wednesday, limited Thursday. He should be out there. CJ Stroud already declared out for the game, took a pretty scary hit to the head last week that has him in concussion protocol, and they're going to roll out Davis Mills this week. And then Dalton Schultz was on the injury report, limited on Wednesday, but full participant yesterday. We expect to see him out there. So, Jeff, we have to talk about the wide receivers here for the Jacksonville Jaguars. Do you have the cojones to put Jacoby Myers in any lineups this week?
I did some lineups yesterday, and I don't know that Jacoby made the cut to get into the lineup. My thought on this is Parker Washington is the nominal wide receiver one right now with Thomas and with Hunter out, and with Jacoby Myers getting an acclimation period. I think long term, it's easy, assuming all the pieces are there long term, you could see, I think, Hunter and Thomas as the outside receivers and Myers as the slot receiver, bringing size to that wide receivers. And I don't know that the commitment to Parker Washington, I feel like, is like a little bit iffy in terms of it's a lot of struggle targets right now, or a lot of passing offense that's really struggling to get going. And I think
Washington's looked good this year.
He has looked good.
I think it's been more than just like junk volume. Like,
yeah,
he's outplaying Brian Thomas Jr. this year. And I know that sounds absolutely insane, but what Liam Cohen asks of the receivers to like catch balls across the middle of the field through traffic to take hits, Parker Washington is doing that much better than Brian Thomas Jr. has at any point this season.
He absolutely has. And we did the live show last night during Thursday Night Football with Matt Waldman, and we were joined by Colton Dodson, who's a great analyst on our staff. And Matt brought up the question of Brian Thomas's future with the Jaguars, because
that's where I was going next. I think the Jacoby Myers trade tells me Brian Thomas Jr. is gone this offseason.
Yeah, because they can re-sign Jacoby Myers and do basically what Brian Thomas Jr. is doing at a cheaper rate, and then they can make Travis Hunter maybe the primary receiver in the offense, a role that he might be a little bit more equipped for than Thomas, and really probably do very, very well with a trade of Brian Thomas, and you're not worried about the potential headache with that anymore.
Well, that Matt Waldman, he's a smart guy, because that's exactly where I was going to go with this. I think that, if Brian Thomas Jr. comes back, which I've heard a lot of different reports, the Twitter doctors are so quick to say like everything is just like a season ender. But the reality, what we're hearing from Jacksonville Beat, is that it's going to be 1 week, maybe 2 weeks, and then Brian Thomas Jr. should be back. And I think you still have to start Brian Thomas Jr., because like even though it's been bad, he's not living up to his expectations. Even in his worst games, like he's still giving you a floor of 6, 7, 8 points, and then he still could have that boom game of 20 points. So I think the expectations, of course, Brian Thomas Jr. is not going to live up to being the guy that you drafted 11th overall in your fantasy draft, but I think that he still makes for a serviceable kind of back end wide receiver too. The question something I really want to talk about, and this isn't really this matchup, this is just more of a big picture thing. Travis Hunter already missed 1 game. He's on IR. We know he's going to miss at least the next 3 weeks. I'm at the point, if I don't have an IR spot, I'm okay just dropping Travis Hunter in my fantasy football leagues. And I know that there's a lot of hope that he can be that like late season league winner. But when you actually start to map out the logistics of how this could work, best case scenario is that he's back week 13. But we don't know that he's back. The news that we got is that his ACL is intact. We didn't hear that, hey, it's a very minor injury and he's going to be back after IR. So what happens? He comes back week 13. There's a slow ramp up period. Week 14, you feel good and you get him in your lineup. That's maybe the best case scenario. What happens if he comes back week 14 or week 15? Like, we didn't even feel good about putting Travis Hunter in our lineups coming out of the bye when he had his big breakout game. We still kind of wanted to see how this would play out. I just think more often, I think Travis Hunter is 10 times more likely to just be a roster clogger this year than he is to be a league winner.
Yeah, and we're late enough in the year that we feel good about projecting matchups and just looking ahead at the Jaguars' potential fantasy playoffs matchup. And week 16, they're going to Denver. You don't really want pieces there. In week 17, they're going to Indianapolis. And we just saw the Colts go out and get Sauce Gardner and Travarius Ward on the other side. So that doesn't exactly seem like a great matchup either. And so that's if you're sitting there with the Bengals or the Dallas Cowboys in your week 16, week 17, that's one conversation. When you're having actively avoid matchups for those fantasy playoffs, you love the sabotage drop, Dave, and maybe Travis Hunter might qualify as a sabotage drop.
And did an episode earlier this week talking about sabotage drops, and I talked about Travis Hunter to the dismay of the audience. They were livid to hear it, but that's where I'm at right now. And if you got an IR spot, completely different situation. Stash him on your IR spot, see what happens. This is more for your shallow leagues, but if you're in one of those leagues where you just have 6 bench spots and you don't have an IR spot, I would drop, if there's a Isaiah Davis, a Blake Corum, and Emmanuel Wilson, one of these running backs that has a path to being a league winner. I think that's a shorter and easier path to attain than what Travis Hunter would have to do to get there. For the Houston Texans, Jeff, Davis Mills is starting. Don't feel great about that. I think you're still getting Nico Collins in your lineup. I will say too, my gut instinct was to say, what are Nico Collins' splits with Davis Mills? And then I was looking into it, and then I was like, what am I even doing here? Nico Collins is such a better, more well-rounded receiver now than he was when he was playing with Davis Mills in 2022. We got to remember, Nico Collins came into the league, a round 3 pick, an athlete, a very raw project type of receiver. It took him 3 years to kind of figure it out and get up to speed. So I think anybody citing the splits with Davis Mills is just looking at the situation wrong. Nico Collins is a much better player now than he was when Davis Mills was starting. And we saw when Davis Mills came in last week, he understood the assignment. He was hyper-targeting Nico Collins. So I'm still looking at Nico Collins as a low-end wide receiver 1 in this matchup.
Yeah, I mean, if you give us something to overanalyze, we're going to overanalyze it probably when it comes down to it. But the volume should be there for Collins, and I think the volume should be there for Dalton Schultz. That was what we saw last week with Davis Mills and at the tight end. And
last week with Davis Mills, like it's been, the last month with CJ Stroud as well.
It has been, and I think the other receiver pieces, Xavier Hutchinson will find his way into the end zone because that seems to be what he does every other week. But I think that when you stack it up, it's like kind of like Carolina a little bit, where we want these young players to emerge. We want these second receiver, or these guys that we used an early second round rookie pick on Jaden Higgins. We want to plug him into our lineup, or we like Jalen Noel and we want him to. The reality of it is when you've got 5 different receivers that you're talking about getting snaps, it's going to be the Nico Collins and Dalton Schultz show more often than not.
Yeah, and we saw last week that with Christian Kirk back in the lineup, Jalen Noel, why am I drawing a blank? Jaden Higgins, like they were both just afterthoughts, like just pushed completely out of the game plan. So if you're still starting those guys this week, you got to reevaluate it. And, you could probably find somebody on the waiver wire that's going to perform better than Jalen Noel at this point.
Yeah, and mentioned Hutchinson. Hutchinson's really good at what Hutchinson does. He's kind of like this is the spiritual successor show apparently, but it's like Alan Lazard a little bit there, where he's really good in it. Alan Lazard is an Iowa State guy. So, just sometimes those schools have certain types of guys, but Hutchinson is an excellent blocker at the wide receiver position, and he can be a red zone threat. They like going to him there, but yeah, it's really preventing it's you putting him on the bench for Jaden Higgins. Like it's just kind of one of those conversations that you run into that, talk about sabotage drops, but if somebody's still holding Higgins in a redraft league, that might be an example of somebody that you can drop, and maybe even not at sabotage level. Maybe nobody would add him if you were to just drop him.
Yeah, depending on how deep the league is, he might just stay on the waiver wire. But
it's one of those of like, it's always insightful to me because especially in Dynasty, you'll have these guys that you don't really want to move off of, but then I'll see them available in waivers in another league and I'll be like, I don't really feel like adding him. And it's like, well, that probably tells me I should drop him in the league. I feel like I probably should drop him in.
Yeah, me with Trey Lance. Like I still have Trey Lance in a handful of Dynasty rosters, and the leagues that I'm not rostering Trey Lance, he is obviously available on waivers, and I'm like, I just can't click that drop button yet. So yeah, maybe this will be the year for Trey Lance. I don't think there's anything else to talk about here too much, Jeff. The running backs.
I think just backfields. We haven't touched backfields yet. I mean, Nick Chubb's coming in with an injury. We've seen Woody Marks kind of pull in front there. And then, it's the when's the young guy going to take over with Tootin and ETN? And we haven't seen anything at all change in the usage in the Jacksonville backfield since the beginning of the season. The rookies have been the same snap share, same involvement level. It's just that Tootin, and I guess it's only 2 touchdowns, but he had a receiving touchdown. Yeah, Tootin is finding himself in a position to get the touchdown, but it's not intentional. It seems like when I'm watching the Jaguars, it's accidentally Tootin will be in the game when they're down at the 10-yard line and he'll run it in, but it's not something that they're doing intentionally.
He got slammed at the goal line like 4 times last week. It was so frustrating because like Travis Etienne had himself a good game, couldn't find the end zone, but like they ran a play where they lined him up as a wildcat quarterback at the 1-yard line and he got stuffed. Like they were doing everything they could to get Travis Etienne in the end zone last week. So yeah, I know everybody's waiting for the inevitable takeover of Tootin, but this is very clearly Etienne's backfield. And then I think when it comes down to Marks and Chubb, I've got Woody Marks as RB28 on the week, which is a low end RB3. I've got Nick Chubb as RB38, which is a low end RB4. I think there are a lot of teams that have 2 running backs that I'd feel more comfortable starting than either of these guys.
Yeah, and Woody Marks is the only guy that I feel good having. Good is, I don't know. Good's an interesting word there, but it's all the talk for Mageddon like 2 weeks ago. To me, the Chiefs, the Bengals, and the Cowboys being out is more brutal to my lineups so far from what I've seen than where I was sitting 2 weeks ago.
All right, let's move on to the Bills and the Dolphins. We got James Cook not practicing Wednesday, but returning yesterday in a limited fashion. Would love to see a full practice today, but we'll see how that transpires. Josh Palmer, my goodness. Knee and ankle, he has been limited. Ollie Gordon, limited with an ankle injury, and then Jalen Waddle practicing in full with a foot injury. So, Jeff, let me just ask you, let's put on our hypothetical hats for a minute here and pretend that James Cook doesn't play this week, which we don't expect. But let me just ask you, where would you rank Ray Davis and Ty Johnson if James Cook would be inactive?
I would barely move Ty Johnson up. I mean, move him just a little, but barely probably move him up. And I think Ray Davis would probably be about running back 20 for me. I think I'm a big, the way that I see that backfield breaking down is I understand that Ty Johnson is playing the third down snaps, but it's a little bit like the Samaje Perine playing the third down snaps.
Right.
It's not really scheming to get the ball in Ty Johnson's hands. It's that you trust him, and also it's a good opportunity, the Bills think, to give James Cook a breather. I think that Ray Davis is the direct backup to James Cook and would be the guy that would be in line, especially in this matchup, for 20 plus touches.
So maybe I'm just a total sucker, but Alfredo and I had this conversation on our show a couple of days ago, and I said that if James Cook were to miss, at this point he hadn't logged the limited practice yet, I said that I would have Ray Davis as my RB8 in between Saquon Barkley and Rico Dowdle, just because I would expect it. I mean, this is Miami. Like Miami, this is what teams do, is they run for 200 yards against Miami every single week. So I would totally be taking the cheese here. It does seem like James Cook is going to play. So I guess that's kind of the next question here is, I guess, where's James Cook? I've got him as my RB2 on the week going into this one. I mean, you just look at this Miami matchup. It's not that the Bills need to get right by any means, but this is, we've seen the blueprint to beating Miami is just run it down their throat. Like any team can go for 200 yards on the ground against Miami any week.
Cook can absolutely do that. This is a quit watch game for me because we saw Jaden Phillips traded, the conversation around the Dolphins, and so it's one that
they've been quitting since week 2 of the preseason. It feels like.
Yeah. Well, yes. Since that, I think it was that Bears practice. Ever since that
Bears practice followed up with the Lions practice. It was a rough preseason for the Dolphins.
The kids do all done. If you got kids, they do all done sometimes, and all done for the Dolphins. But I think it's with Cook carrying that injury. My biggest hesitation would be if the Dolphins are not competitive at all, Cook carrying that injury, and they really just unplug him pretty early, and Ray Davis goes in there. We've seen 2 blowout game scripts, 4 blowout wins for the Bills. And in those 2 games, Ray Davis combined 18 rush attempts in those 2 games. Ty Johnson, 17 rush attempts all year long. So I know there's a lot of talk about, well, they paid Ty Johnson and he's playing more and he would be the guy that would come in. I don't think that they see the backfield that way. The Dolphins are usually it's funny because you get these quarterbacks like Josh Allen that's been in the AFC East for a decade now at this point or around there. And they'll have different matchups where it's like the Jets are usually pretty good against Josh Allen. It kind of can be a little bit frustrating on the fantasy side. The Dolphins are the team that he just absolutely eats alive. Yeah. And so it's usually
like 38-0 at halftime.
Yeah. It's usually the Josh Allen just eats the Dolphins alive. And with one of the things that we saw last week, and might've just been tighter game and going into the attentions, we did see Khalil Shakir and Dalton Kincaid as the 2 clear top targets in the Bills passing attack. And that's one of the things that's been frustrating for this Bills passing attack, not having clear top options. It seemed a lot more intentional last week with Kincaid and with Shakir as the top guys there.
Well, let's move on to we do want to talk about the Dolphins a little bit. I mean, we do need to talk about them. Devon Achane, you're obviously starting him. Ollie Gordon, borderline flex player, I guess. I think Jalen Waddle is the interesting discussion here, Jeff, because without Tyreek Hill, there was expectations that he would really kind of blow up, and he's definitely been more involved, but I still don't think we've really seen that ceiling. Do you think it's even possible for a wide receiver in this offense to kind of hit a wide receiver 1 ceiling?
So Waddle, other than the Browns game that was in horrible weather, Waddle, since Tyreek Hill's left the lineup, he's been wide receiver 6. So that's if you take out that Browns, and I mean there were things with that Browns game that would give you a reason to take it out, primarily the weather, but Waddle's been there since Tyreek Hill's left the lineup. So this should be a spot. Christian Benford, I saw yesterday, I don't think Christian Benford had practiced, and they might be going with the rookie Hairston at cornerback, getting more time. Hairston's looked good so far, but that might be an opportunity where Waddle without Benford in the lineup in an offense that should be chasing all day long. I think Waddle is a great spot to start here. Or I think Waddle is a weekly start, but I think Waddle's in a great spot here to do some production. I mean, Devon Achane, you talk about Ollie Gordon, and I feel like there's Ollie Gordon, Tyler Algier, some of these backs that if they're winning, yes, they can be flex level running backs. And if they're losing, you're just looking at them on the sidelines as they're not in the game at all. I think there's a handful of those guys that stack up that way. And I still put Ollie Gordon there, even though I think they would like to get to a point where it's more actively involved throughout game. And I think at some level, the Dolphins are going into every game script as if they're going to be losing. So let's just play Ollie Gordon. But I do think there are those backup running backs that really are very game script dependent. And I think the other thing that is interesting for the Dolphins, Greg Dulcich did not play very many snaps last week, but he kind of looked, and it's kind of the Jonnu Smith struggle target role, that he is that type of player that can do some things after the catch. So I think monitoring Greg Dulcich, he was my bargain of the week in DFS. He's barely above minimum, 2,500's minimum tight end price on DraftKings. He's 2,600. So just throwing it out there, DFS way low dart.
And every single year in the preseason, we always talk about this is the year tight end is deep, and it never actually ends up coming to fruition. I'm going to say it this year. We are midway through the season. Tight end is deep this year. You can stream tight end with ease. I'm looking in my rankings right now. I've got Taysom Hill at tight end 22. That's a guy that I'd feel okay about if I needed to start him. I've got Kate Otten at tight end 24. I'd be okay about starting him if I needed to. I've got Greg Dulcich at tight end 27. And if I needed to get him in a lineup, I feel like I could still end up getting a decent floor there. So we've talked so much about it, but teams that are living out of base 12 personnel this year as a way to combat the way that we've seen defenses changing up. And we're starting to see that tight ends are becoming primary pass catchers on so many offenses right now. So this is a year where, if you missed out, of course, it's great if you got a Brock Bowers or a Trey McBride or a Tyler Warren or one of these guys. But if you don't, there have just been guys popping up in the waiver wire seemingly every single week. I feel like you can get 25, 30 tight ends deep this year that you'd feel, or this week that you'd feel okay about if you needed to rely on them in a spot start.
Yeah, I want to give a nod to Sumer Sports. I think it's Sumer Sports is how you say it. But they do a lot of really good work, and they've really picked up. I used to get from Sharp Football the personnel settings, and I couldn't find it. They stopped doing it, and I couldn't find it anywhere. And now Sumer has it. So hat tip to them. But they had, I apologize, I don't know the analyst's name, but he had made a really good point about how traditionally we think about 12 personnel as leaning to the run, but teams are really getting into 12 personnel in order to set up the pass because of the two high shells that we're seeing. And it's natural, and your 12 personnel is not all the same. You're getting these guys that are really wide receivers playing tight ends at some level that make it 12 personnel. And so that's where just Dulcich, if you're just very desperate, especially if there's a premium on receptions, because the yardage and the touchdown might not necessarily be there.
And there was a Sam Brookhouse, by the way. Yeah, I know the clip that you're talking about. Was on a show with Lindsey Rhodes talking about that. Yeah, and it's something that you and I have been talking about, a little bit last year, a lot this offseason, and a lot this year, that we are just seeing teams why would you want to get the ball? If this is how we're going to combat these too high shell coverage, by getting the ball to our receivers at the line of scrimmage and allow them to create after the catch, why give the ball to a 160-pound wide receiver when you can get the ball to your 6'7", 280-pound guy who's just going to run through the entire defense? It just makes sense to start utilizing these guys as pass catchers. Really excited. I mean, it didn't work out well last night, but just watching the Raiders last night, seeing Brock Bowers and Michael Mayer did not come off the field. These guys are full-time players now, and I think this is how we should see the NFL continue to move in that direction. All right, Jeff, next game we want to talk about here, Ravens at Vikings. All of the Ravens players are healthy. I've never seen this before. I thought the Ravens website was broken when I went to pull the injury report. They don't have a single player on offense, defense, or special teams right now that is on the injury report. Just unbelievable to see heading into week 10. So good job to the Ravens trainers, whatever you're doing to keep these guys healthy. As for the Vikings, nothing too crazy. Aaron Jones picked up a shoulder and a toe injury last week. He was a DNP on Wednesday, but was able to return to practice yesterday and said that he expects to play this week. So Jeff, first question I have for you is about Mark Andrews. You saw the 2 touchdowns last week. Is Mark Andrews now back in the plug-and-play tight end 1 discussion, knowing that Lamar Jackson is back?
I would say
3
no,
targets.
because the volume wasn't there. We saw
Right.
the red zone was back to there, and the Ravens now with Lamar Jackson are capable of getting into the red zone. So that's good. That's a good progression from where that offense stood with Cooper Rush and with Tyler Huntley. So you can get the touchdowns back to where we saw Mark Andrews. I think it was 8 touchdowns last year. These verifiable numbers, I feel like I should not be thinking what they might be, but we know really Mark Andrews was a tight end 5 last year, but it was because the touchdowns propped him up. So those are back in the game. I don't think there's reliable volume for anybody in this passing attack outside of Zay Flowers.
I'm with you as well. Yeah. And like last year, we saw this is another one of those. Like, if you look at the end of season finishes for a lot of these players, you feel good about them, but like, good luck knowing when Rashad Bateman is going to score, or when Mark Andrews is going to score, or when Devontae Walker is going to, or Tylan Wallace is going to have his big catch and run. Like, Zay Flowers is the guy, and we know that we can rely on Lamar and Derrick Henry. But outside of those three, like, the ball gets spread all over the place in this Monken offense. And this is a dirty offense outside of Zay Flowers. And I mean, Zay Flowers, I'm taking the cheese there, because we saw he was heavily involved even when Lamar Jackson was out and the efficiency just wasn't there. I expect that to bounce back a little bit. So we talked about Jalen Waddle a little bit earlier. I've got him as my wide receiver 10. I have Zay Flowers ahead of him as my wide receiver 9 on the week. I just think this is a good matchup against Minnesota. I think they're going to get the ball to him often. Derrick Henry, of course, you're starting him. For the Minnesota Vikings, I don't think there's too much to talk about here. I will say again, I'm going to reference the show that I did yesterday with my buddy Mung. He made a very compelling case for Jordan Mason. Like, I was talking about Jordan Mason, like, just drop this guy off my rosters. I had him outside of my top 50 running backs rest of season. Like, we saw what it looked like. Like, we saw the best case scenario, right? Aaron Jones landed on IR, and we had the one big game from Jordan Mason, and he was an RB3 in every matchup outside of that. But Mung was pushing back a little bit. And he was like, dude, that was a broken offense with no Christian Darrisaw, Carson Wentz starting. He just thinks that the entire offensive environment now with JJ McCarthy and Christian Darrisaw back is better for Jordan Mason. And I can't really disagree with him. So, I was talking about him as a potential drop earlier in the week, but now I'm second guessing it a little bit and wondering what he could look like behind a better offensive line over the second half of the year.
I need to see a lot to say that it's not a broken offense with JJ McCarthy at quarterback. I'll just put that out there.
I mean, hey, they beat Chicago and they beat Detroit on the road. That's impressive. Say whatever you want, but like that to me, like I think JJ McCarthy deserves a lot of credit for winning those 2 games.
Well, I think that week 1 Bears team is not the same probably Bears team that you might get now, okay. and so that's part of it. The Lions game was, I mean, I've talked frequently about Bill Simmons being a big influence in my content life, and Bill Simmons talks about the kitchen sink game, and that's where you're just going to throw everything you got because you have to win this game. And I think last week was a kitchen sink game for the Vikings, and they just knew they had to beat the Lions for their season to continue. Maybe the Lions got caught a little bit flat-footed with a team that they saw get blown out just previously against the Chargers. So I think that kind of happened. I think that things are still broken in this Minnesota offense. And you talk about every Ravens game now as a kitchen sink game. And I think that they know the hole that they put themselves into. I just think this is a really difficult spot for the Vikings side of this. And with Aaron Jones potentially out of the lineup, you're going to Jordan Mason because the volume should be there. I mean, the volume will likely be there, but I think I lean more towards the Ravens blowing the Vikings out than the Vikings having a competent offense that's going to allow a touchdown dependent lack of passing game running back to be a really good start.
Maybe I'm just like overcorrecting. I just think like the rhetoric and the narrative around JJ McCarthy has gotten so out of hand. Like, people just buried this guy after 2 games. And like, even last week, and Jeff, I'm not like picking on you specifically, but you say it still looks like a broken offense. Like, I think it looked like an offense being run by a 22-year-old kid making his 3rd NFL start. Like, the scripted part, the early part of the game, he looked really good. He was able to drive down the field twice, score 2 passing touchdowns, and then there were some miscues. He missed some easy passes. He had the botched snap, but when it came down to it, And like he had to make a really difficult throw to seal that game. Like that throw that he made to Jalen Naylor, like just floating it to him while he was covered, hitting that third down pass. One, I think it shows the trust that Kevin O'Connell has in JJ McCarthy to call that play. And two, JJ McCarthy executed when he needed to. So yeah, there were some things in the middle that I'd expect to see from a young quarterback, but I think that he is trending in the right direction. And I think everybody who has just been burying McCarthy so far this year, I think there's still a lot of his career left, and I think that we should be a little bit more careful about like throwing around declarative statements around a 22-year-old quarterback.
Oh, I completely agree with that. So you talk about them starting strong and then failing. What happened in the middle of that game?
Aaron Jones got hurt.
Aaron Jones looked excellent to start that game, and I think that
he's the ageless wonder, man. Like he looks better every year somehow. It makes no sense.
Yeah, Aaron Jones has looked excellent when he's been back in the lineup, and so him being injured out of the lineup, that happened to coincide or was the entire reason why the offense fell apart there about in the middle of the game and really kind of struggled to push towards the end. JJ McCarthy is very toolsy, and JJ McCarthy he's got receivers. There is very much potential for upside in fantasy, even this year, but long-term, especially in this offensive environment. We've seen this offensive environment make Nick Mullins fantasy relevant at times in his career. And Nick Mullins is not bringing any of the athleticism McCarthy brings. I think that Aaron Jones was a key part of that hot start against the Lions, and him not being in the lineup just really changes the complexion of this offense.
And I expect to see him back out there, but I will say if he's dealing with this AC joint sprain right now on his shoulder, we might not see him getting that between the tackles work. That might flow towards Jordan Mason a little bit, but Aaron Jones, his best stuff over the last couple of years has been when you can get him out in space, and not just out in space, like in the flat either, like running deep wheel routes, like pulling targets 20 yards downfield. Like he is just such a weapon out there, and this whole offense is better when he's out there, and we expect him to be out there this Sunday. So, again, I talk about it all the time. Like I'm a Bears fan, but I'm a football fan more than I'm a Bears fan. And I want to see JJ McCarthy succeed. You know, he came from just down the street from where I grew up, like a couple of towns over. People have already written him off for dead. Like I'm always cheering for the underdog. I want to see JJ McCarthy do well because I think that the NFL is better when we have young talent doing well. So I'm hoping the Vikings can start to string together some games and look good here. Let's move on to the next one here, Jeff. We got the Browns at the New York Jets. The one that you joked around should have been shipped over to Berlin instead of the game that we actually have playing in Berlin. Cedric Tillman back at practice, practicing in full with a hamstring injury. He was on IR for almost the majority of the season, but he is back now, expected to play. Isaiah Bond is out. He's not out. He's been out of practice. We expect him to be out in this game, but hasn't been officially declared yet. Has yet to practice this week. Garrett Wilson returned to practice. He's dealing with this knee injury, practicing in a limited fashion. And then Mason Taylor is on the injury report with a quad injury, but he's practicing in full. Jeff, I kind of jokingly, a little tongue-in-cheek in my article this week, I said, you know, Dylan Gabriel doesn't like throwing the ball to anybody besides tight ends, but Cedric Tillman is big, and maybe Dylan Gabriel confuses him for a tight end. And I think that, like, if there's one wide receiver that I'm mildly interested in this week, it's Cedric Tillman.
I gave you a mention last night on the DFS show, Dave, and I talked about how you were really high on Terrace Ferguson in the rookie everything, and cited Terrace Ferguson's run after the catch statistics.
And I've seen what Dylan Gabriel's doing with these tight ends in Cleveland.
Yeah, that probably had less to do with Terrence Ferguson's run after the catch ability and more to do with the way that Dylan Gabriel was running the Oregon offense last year and what they had the Oregon offense morphed itself to be in order to have Dylan Gabriel do that. I mean, the volume's been there for Jerry Jeudy, but not really. I mean, the targets have been there, but he's not put anything together. The targets have been there. Dylan Gabriel's really struggled to get the ball outside of the numbers, and I think that's the biggest thing. And I mean, you've got Kevin Stefanski has given up play calling duties with Paul DePodesta leaving to go be the president for the Rockies. You know, people are abandoning ship. This game is two-sided quit watch. So on this one, this is going to be like when the episode of South Park when they are trying to quit in the Little League team, and then they play a team that have like practiced learning how to lose. It's like that type of a game. I feel like coming in here with these two teams, I don't want any. I mean, I think Judy's the only one you can make a somewhat of a case for in terms of just volume's been there. I don't like any of the receivers for the Browns. Outside of Quinshon Judkins,
contextualize what I said. I think Cedric Tillman is worth like a pickup and a stash just to see how this plays out. I still do have Judy ahead of him in my rankings, but they're both, I mean, wide receiver 49 and wide receiver 57. That is break glass in case of emergency territory.
I mean, the big question is how long, and I don't like the where the conversation has been with Shedeur Sanders since he got drafted, but at the same time, how long until Shedeur Sanders gets an opportunity? Because it definitely seems like the fan base is there with Dillon Gabriel. I don't know what we've seen from Dillon Gabriel to suggest that he's going to be quarterback moving forward. And usually even to get to some of these guys that turn into career backups, it's guys like Mitch Trubisky that really do flash early in their careers that allow them to get the multiple years of experience or being in the system for multiple years that can morph into being a backup quarterback, a guy like Marcus Mariota, something like that. Gabriel doesn't have that. And so if you don't have the initial level of success, then the time spent in the league tends to be a whole lot shorter. And I think that's the biggest question for the Browns offense is how long until Shedeur Sanders gets an opportunity, because at some level you recognize it's probably not going to be Shedeur Sanders and Dillon Gabriel as the long-term answer for this organization. So let's see what Shedeur Sanders can do, because we've seen what Dillon Gabriel can't do. But I think it's Judkins, and we're monitoring the health of Harold Fannin. But if he's out, then Judkins and David Njoku are about all you really want on the Brown side here.
And you talk about, Trubisky and Marcus Mariota and Carson Wentz, and I'm looking at Kenny Pickett and Mac Jones, a lot of these guys who do become these like career backups. A lot of them have draft capital, and like that's why they were drafted, because like they do have the tools and what you need to be a long-term quarterback, and that's why we see these Spencer Rattlers and Dillon Gabriels and these guys that have like very clear issues in their profiles flame out quicker rather than not. And that's why, believe it or not, these scouts and GMs that dedicate their entire lives to picking the right guys early in drafts are pretty good at their jobs. And that's why we see these guys, even if Mitch Trubisky doesn't evolve into being the guy that he was supposed to be, he's going to maintain a role in the NFL for 12 to 15 years because he's got the tools to do that. Anything else in this game, Jeff? I mean, we can talk about the Jets, but we know what we're doing here. We're starting Justin Fields. You're starting Garrett Wilson. Breece Hall, I guess that's what I want to talk about. I talked myself into it. Breece Hall. Every week we're talking about like how isn't this guy rostered in 100% of leagues? And that's where I'm at with Isaiah Davis right now. I mean, Breece Hall very clearly said, I do not want to be here. Get me out of New York. Was tweeting, through it leading up to the trade deadline. It seems like he doesn't want to be there. It seems like the team doesn't value him. We see Isaiah Davis before the bye have this 100-yard game. I wonder at what point Breece Hall is just going to say like, hey, my ankle's bothering me. I can't play this week, and really just look forward to the offseason where he can hopefully sign with the new team. Isaiah Davis, to me, has league winner written all over him, just because Breece Hall, if there's one guy that I expect not to finish the season, Breece Hall feels like a guy who is primed to take off the last few weeks.
Are the Jets starting Justin Fields? I don't know if I'm there on Justin Fields in this matchup against the Browns, because I think he could get benched very easily if Tyrod Taylor is healthy. And it makes
Tyrod Taylor healthy last week?
I don't know that he was or was. Well, they won. They had a bye last week, but they won. Taylor was out against the Bengals, and then they had a bye last week. So
I thought Taylor was healthy, and I maybe I was reading that wrong. I thought Aaron Glenn,
he was out against the Bengals. I thought he was announced out pre-game against. Maybe I'm wrong, but
maybe I know he was dealing with an injury, but I don't know. It seems like Justin Fields is still the guy here. Like we saw that one like half game where Taylor took over, but that was like Justin Fields. We talked about that. Like he took a brutal blow to the head, and I think that somehow was able to pass concussion protocol, but like he was wobbling after that play, like looked awful when he came back in the 3 drives after that. I think there might have been like an undiagnosed concussion, and if not a concussion, like I think he was just rattled by that hit. I think Justin Fields is still the guy here.
Yeah, and I mean, and that's the conversation. But Adonai Mitchell, I think, is the interesting thing to monitor here with this Jets offense of adding Adonai Mitchell in that Sauce Gardner trade and just where the rest of the receivers outside of Garrett Wilson have been. It might take some time to acclimate. Maybe he immediately jumps in there, but you would have to believe that they want to see what they have with Adonai Mitchell. He brings the verticality that outside of Arian Smith, no other Jets receiver has that, and Arian Smith doesn't have the size or probably just the explosive ability overall of Adonai Mitchell. Explosive is the wrong term to use there. With Arian Smith is very explosive, but he's just not the level of receiver at the highest level that Mitchell can be. And I think that we've seen we talked about Parker Washington. Parker Washington was one of those of these receivers late in the season in just lost situations that do become fantasy relevant and put some numbers up. Mitchell, I think, is going to be the most interesting thing to watch just in terms of what's changing in this Jets offense.
And then we've also got I skipped over it. We're dealing with a Harold Fannin injury as well. Looking at it right now, he's dealing with a hamstring injury. Wasn't on Wednesday's injury report, but did pop up on Thursdays. So, Jeff, if Harold Fannin can't go, does that put David Njoku into the tight end one, must-start territory?
I believe it does, yes. And David Njoku at 3,200 on DraftKings really is probably going to be your chalk in your cash game plays.
All right, let's move on to the next game here. The New England Patriots at Tampa Bay Buccaneers. And in this one, we've got Kayshon Boutte not practicing with a hamstring injury, Ramondre Stevenson not practicing with a toe injury, Bucky Irving not practicing with a foot and shoulder injury, Chris Godwin still not practicing with his fibula injury, and then Baker Mayfield. He's on the injury report, but as always, he is practicing in full. So, Jeff, lots of injuries to deal with here. Boutte was starting to seem like he was emerging as the wide receiver one, but in his absence, we have seen Demario Douglas step up. We've seen Stephon Diggs playing a larger snap share as well. Assuming Boutte can't go in this game, who is the Patriots receiver that you'd be looking at?
I mean, it's going to be Diggs is the receiver that you're looking at. We've seen Demario Douglas make some big plays downfield, and he mentioned that his uncle had passed away right before the game last week, right. And Terrell Jennings grew up with Demario Douglas. They were both kind of feeling that loss as they went out, having those great performances. I think the guy that nobody talks about that's really maybe interesting, Mac Hollins, 2 games ago against the Browns, out of nowhere.
I knew you were going
7 receptions, 89 yards. Out of nowhere. We've seen Kyle Williams tick up in volume, in snap volume. Demario Douglas didn't really move in snap volume, and maybe that performance last week or the last couple of performances is enough to make them go to Demario Douglas a bit more. I think that when you look at Douglas, the problem with him, he's limited as a slot player. Afton Chisholm's getting some offensive snaps for the first time, so that's another slot player. You've got Diggs playing in the slot. Mac Hollins has been the top receiver in snaps all year long. He's kind of been that guy that's been out there, been on the field. Kyle Williams.
Talk about an Allen Lazard, the spiritual successor. I mean, that's Mac Hollins. Let's be honest. He's more of a tight end than he is a wide receiver.
Mac Hollins is entirely his own creation of that. There's one of one of Mac Hollins going into not wearing shoes into the stadium and everything with him. But it's really boom or bust to even think about going to Mac Hollins, because there are other games where he's just not involved at all. And we do see those games sometimes where the 7 targets, 7 receptions, 89 yards, and you look at the numbers at the end of the year and everything else is 22 yards at the most. That's potentially there. I think to play anything outside of Stephon Diggs is some level of desperation, but Drake May has been playing so well and the Buccaneers are capable of creating a shootout environment, maybe that's kind of where you are open to going to a different play here.
So let's talk about let's talk about the Patriots backfield real quick, and then we'll talk about the Bucs. I don't know what to do. I mean, we assume Ramondre Stevenson is going to be out in this matchup. And I really want to get there with TreVeyon Henderson. I do. He looked so good last week. We saw the big plays. We see what he can do, but we also know that Mike Vrabel and Josh McDaniels are Bill Belichick disciples, and they are not going to give the backfield to anybody, and absolutely not to a rookie. So as much as I want to say, wheels up for TreVeyon Henderson, I'm still, again, and we talked about this last week, tempering my expectations a little bit. I've got him ranked as my RB21, and Terrell Jennings is still falling into flex territory because we just know this is what they are going to do. Like TreVeyon Henderson, to me, this feels very similar to what we opened the show with, talking about DeAndre Swift and Kyle Monungai, where TreVeyon Henderson is a guy who can catch passes, he can make the big plays, and that's what gives him so much fantasy value. But Terrell Jennings is still going to get an annoying amount of touches. He's going to carve out 35, 40% of the work for himself.
Yeah, I hear you. The Buccaneers are tied with the Patriots, with the Broncos, with the Rams for the best defensive EPA versus the rush. This is a really good run defense, has traditionally been a really good run defense. And so I think that that's my point on TreVeyon Henderson of being involved in the passing game. And I think that that's the path for this game offensively for the Patriots. I think
Bucs are giving up more receiving yards to running backs than any other team out there.
Yes.
That's worth noting.
And so, and that's where I definitely lean Henderson to over Jennings for sure. But I'm I'm really nervous about Jennings. We saw a touchdown last week that make him a good spot start, and I think it could be a shootout here. We could get a goal line carry out of Jennings, but that Bucs run defense is really, really good, and I think the path will be through the air here for the Patriots, and that's a good potential path for TreVeyon Henderson, assuming he doesn't hold 3 different times and get benched and all that. So
let's talk about the Bucs here. These injuries, man. Like we were hoping they had the bye week last week, and we're like, they're going to come out of the bye, they're going to be healthy, the Bucs are going to be back, and no, Bucky Irving still isn't practicing. Chris Godwin still isn't practicing. The word that we got on Chris Godwin is that he might not be ready until December. So, Jeff, at this point, like, why even continue rostering Chris Godwin? Like, theme of this episode seems to be spiritual successors and sabotage drops. I mean, you want to talk about a sabotage drop? Like, well, give me the case for still rostering Chris Godwin at this point.
Well, while I filibuster and pull up the Buccaneers playoff schedule, so they have the Falcons, the Panthers, and the Dolphins in the fantasy playoffs. And I mean, week 17 matchup against the Dolphins, really tempting. I mean, the argument is volume, and the argument is that a healthy Chris Godwin, with definitely Mike Evans out of the lineup, but just where the rest of the receivers are in this offense, the argument is if Chris Godwin can be healthy to end the season, the potential for 12 to 15 targets in your fantasy playoffs is very real relative to some other receivers that might be available on waivers, some potential pivots in your league. That's the argument for Chris Godwin. And you would think that if he gets healthy, they're headed to the playoffs, they would want to maybe force some volume in some of those games leading into the playoffs just to get him very comfortable, because the highest potential outcome of this Buccaneers offense would be Chris Godwin establishing back into that slot role that we saw him dominate so well in last year. And so I'm less there on a sabotage drop of Chris Godwin. I understand being frustrated and having that piece there and just being a lost season. That's very real potential. But at the same time, you don't want to get into, if you can afford it, you don't want to get into your fantasy championship game and you had dropped Chris Godwin in week 10 and your opponent has Chris Godwin coming in as the wide receiver 5 over the last 3 games into that matchup. So
fair. I do just think that by the time we get there, like Jalen McMillan will be back. They're even talking about like Mike Evans being back by the end of the season. Like that was the whole thing, is that he could be back for week 16, week 17, week 18. So like if Chris Godwin is returning at the time that Mike Evans is back, Jalen McMillan is back, Tez Johnson's out of the box, Emeka Egbuka is there as well. I mean, of course, like other injuries could happen as well. I just very frustrated with Chris Godwin. And then Bucky Irving, another player that has been extremely frustrating, still doesn't seem like he is ready to practice as well. And the report that we got yesterday is that his shoulder is a bigger issue than the foot injury. Like we were hearing, like, I thought the foot was the main problem. Like this guy was in a walking boot for a month. And now we're hearing that the shoulder is actually a bigger issue than the foot. They're saying that he might miss some more time as well. So I think to me, like that just tells me like we're continuing to fire Rachaad White up, who's been, I mean, I will say last week we saw, not last week, 2 weeks ago, the last game that they played, saw a little bit more Sean Tucker in that matchup, but I still think Rachaad White, like you're looking at him as a very high-end RB2 in this matchup, right?
Yeah, hypothetically, but I just mentioned the top defenses and run EPA, and I believe I mentioned the Patriots in that conversation when I mentioned the Buccaneers. I think on both sides of this,
his value comes through the air way more than it comes on the ground, though, right?
Yes. I think my larger concern of what we've seen from this Buccaneers offense, what we've seen from Baker Mayfield, it's really struggled the last couple of weeks, and not having the bye definitely helps because they were really banged up, but it seems like defenses have definitely adjusted to Emeka Egbuka, who was fantastic through the first 5 weeks, really has not done a lot since getting injured the last 3 weeks. I think that's one of those that we've talked before on the show about players that maybe are lights out the first 5 weeks and then it falls off, and it really takes people some time to recognize that it has fallen off. Egbuka has kind of fallen off right now here. This is a really difficult matchup for the run game on the Buccaneers side. The Buccaneers offense has been struggling. The Patriots defense has been thriving. So I think I lean a little bit more towards break glass in case of emergency than we would think normally, probably for Buccaneers. That being said, I think this game could shoot out with these two quarterbacks.
Absolutely. And I think that's kind of what I'm trending towards is a shootout in this one, and we'll see how it plays out. But Jeff, let's move on to the afternoon games now.
We didn't mention K-Dot, and we did not mention Joey Wright yet. And Joey Wright is fantastic. And I didn't mention Joey Wright last night. Joey Wright is the spiritual leader of the football guys in some levels here. And we're so thrilled that Joey Wright spent the morning with us here in the chat. But we got to mention Pedialyte Otten, the nickname that Joey coined for K-Dot, and his favorite tight end in the NFL, and Joey gets to host the Football Guys Sunday Live show that I get to be a guest on every single week. And so, Joey, we see you, we love you.
And on one hand, I'll say I've got Cade Otton outside of my top 20 tight ends this week, but on the other hand, I'll say, as I said earlier on the show, everybody down to basically tight end 30 is in the streaming discussion this week. So Cade Otton definitely worth a streamer this week if you've got him. On to the late afternoon games. First one we got here, Arizona Cardinals at Seattle Seahawks, NFC West showdown. Excited about this one. Zay Jones is limited with a knee injury. AJ Barner dealing with a calf injury. And then, before AJ Barner, of course, we've got Kyler Murray landing on IR, and Jacoby Brissett will be the starter going forward. For the Seahawks, we've got AJ Barner dealing with a calf injury, Elijah Arroyo practicing in full, so no concerns there. Torrey Horton dealing with a groin injury, full practice on Wednesday, and then a DNP on Thursday, so we'll make some sense of that. Cooper Kupp still not practicing as of Wednesday, but was able to return in a limited fashion on Thursday. And then, of course, the Seahawks traded for Rashid Shaheed, which we will definitely talk about. Jeff, I think the main conversation here, Jacoby Brissett. We are going to see the next 4+ weeks with Jacoby Brissett under center for the Cardinals. How excited does that have you for Trey McBride and Marvin Harrison Jr.?
I mean, more excited. I mean, Trey McBride's probably a push between him and Kyler Murray just because Kyler Murray doesn't want to throw it past 5 yards downfield. Definitely way more excited for Marvin Harrison Jr., who
I think the touchdowns with Trey McBride are the big difference. He scores touchdowns without Kyler Murray, and he doesn't score touchdowns with Kyler Murray.
Yeah, and I'm putting a massive grain of salt on Jacoby Brissett's performances so far. The Packers are a good defense, but also they didn't play the Packers. The Packers in primetime seem to be an entirely different team than the Packers at any other moment in time. And they didn't play the Packers in week 1 in Cleveland. Yeah, well, that was that screwy game where the Packers flights were not able to get out. And so they just really started that game slow. That was Brissett in that game. And then he played the Dallas defense. And I think you and I could you gain a yard against an NFL defense? Well, if it's the Cowboys, I mean, we probably have a decent shot there. That's the caveat that I'm putting on these performances from Jacoby Myers, because we saw Jacoby Myers in extended play last year for the Patriots, and there was nothing special there. I'm really hesitant on anything. Jacoby Myers has turned the corner at this point in Jacoby Brissett, has turned the corner at this point in his career and is a relevant fantasy piece. This is another tough match, another tough division matchup. The Seahawks, my EPA list of rush defenses, the Seahawks are, they are number 2 behind the Browns. They shut down the run game entirely, and the Cardinals don't have a good run game outside of if Trey Benson's able to return anyways. So that's a factor.
And not this week. That will not be happening this week. It's still going to be the Frankenstein backfield of Amari DeMercado and Zonovan Knight and Michael Carter. And I do want to talk about that briefly before we switch over to the Seahawks. who do you prefer in this backfield? Like, I really topped out wide receiver, or I'm sorry, RB35 and RB36 for me are Amari DeMercado and Zonovan Knight, meaning like they are both low end RB3s. Take your Alka-Seltzer if you're starting them, and hope that everything's going to work out. But like, no, I don't feel good about any of these running backs in Arizona.
No, you can't feel good. Well, no, feeling good. No, I mean, Michael Carter doesn't exist right now in my mind. Yeah. Michael Carter is out of here, and I think it's DeMercado. There was some things there with the dropping the ball on the goal line and then being injured the next game. He's clearly the most explosive back that they have. And he was the last 2 years, he was the passing down back within this offense. So there, that there's level of trust there. I think what I wanted to see last week against Dallas was who was going to really emerge here in their roles. And to me, Zonovan Knight is just going to be, Knight is going to be replaced by Trey Benson. When Trey Benson returns, Knight goes to the bench, or maybe is not even in a game day active. And DeMercado is in that passing down role that he has been in the last couple of seasons. Clearly more explosive last week than Knight. Clearly the most explosive option that the Panthers have. There's a level of comfort utilizing him in the passing game. I think this is going to be a game that they're going to have to utilize the passing game. And so if I'm desperate or I'm forced to play a Cardinals running back here, DeMercado is the one that I want to play.
That's where I am as well. Now let's talk about the Seahawks a little bit. I think the biggest question is going to be Rashid Shaheed, how he finds a role in this offense. I will say, like, I think typically the voice of reason says, like, for a wide receiver that gets traded to a team, like, you want to kind of take a wait and see approach. But if you're desperate enough, I think that there is some potential here with Rashid Shaheed. Like, he comes from New Orleans where he was with Clint Kubiak last year. He already knows the playbook. And we saw him last year, like, just giving us the high-end wide receiver 2 value through the first month and a half of the season before he got hurt last year. So this immediately adds another explosive element to the Seattle Seahawks offense. I think that this unfortunately pushes Torrey Horton just out of the picture for the rest of this year. I think Rashid Shaheed, I mean, I'm not saying that like you need to get this guy in your lineup, but where conventional wisdom would probably tell you to take a wait and see approach. I've got Shaheed as my wide receiver 37 on the week, meaning that he is in that flex consideration.
The argument for Shaheed is he just needs one play. We saw it early with Clint Kubiak, just needs one play to be able to be worth starting. The argument against is this really the only receiver here that's getting volume is Jackson Smith and Jigba. We see the rest of the pieces. It's a little bit like the Texans, I think, in some regard of just kind of the sprinkle it about with the other players. I think the acquisition of Shaheed,
they gave two picks for Shaheed. Like this wasn't like just a junk trade. Like they gave real draft capital to get Rashid Shaheed. Yeah,
I agree. That said, the timing is a little bit interesting because Cooper Kupp missed the game and Cody White played 71% of the snaps, and you just learned Cody White's name, and so that's probably that happening right before the trade deadline is one of those of we think we're a good team. We're in the playoffs. We had a great dominant performance on Sunday Night Football. And meanwhile, we're running Cody White as the primary receiver if we have one injury to our top 3 receivers. And so having that level of familiarity, part of me being a Bills fan and really wanting Rashid Shaheed to be a Bills can't help but wonder if the Bills, they beat the Chiefs and that makes them feel like they're a little bit okay in the weapons that they have. Meanwhile, Seattle is running Cody White out there when Cooper Kupp misses time, and they're saying, okay, we definitely need to address this piece as we get into the playoffs. I think Shaheed's really interesting.
Do you ever have those trades like where you get the notification on your app where it says like a trade's being completed and then you open it up and you see the trade and you're like, dang, like if I knew this player was getting traded for this cheap, I would have had him. You think Brandon Beane probably felt that way when he saw the Rashid Shaheed trade?
Beane said that, so he had a press conference and he said that if he would have bet, he would have bet on the Bills making a trade at the deadline. If he were betting, he would have lost money. I think there was a level of frustration. I think some of it's, you're not exactly dealing on like plain terms, because if you're the acquiring team and you have a Seahawks 4th and a Bills 4th, you don't necessarily think that they are similar assets probably when you get down to it. And so I think sometimes the Chiefs, the Bills are dealing with some of those of, we're getting a fourth from this team over here, but your fourth to beat that would have to be a third or a lot more on top of it, because not all fourths are created equally. I think that might have played into it. I think there was definitely a level of frustration, and there was Deebo Samuel's rumored in the Bills. There was Shaheed rumors to the Bills. So I think that Shaheed long-term or even short-term adds a lot to this Seattle room, and where you had Torrey Horton making big plays, and I think the potential is definitely there, but we've talked before about young receivers, kind of ask them to do one thing, and then when they master that one thing, you can ask them to do a second thing. I don't think they were at the point yet of Torrey Horton being asked to do a second thing, and Cooper Kupp just being he's the athletic tight end now. Of when you flip the game on, who's that athletic tight end moving around? That's Cooper Kupp now. So you have that, and Rashid Shaheed adds a lot more just all around.
So in the theme of sabotage drops, Jeff, Cooper Kupp, is there any reason to keep rostering him at this point?
No, I don't know that there's definitely.
I don't even know if that's a sabotage drop. That feels like a sabotage drop, and then next Thursday rolls around and Cooper Kupp's still sitting on waivers in that league.
That, or you get one of those, you're in a PPR league and Cooper Kupp catches 8 balls for 50 yards, and you're like, well, that was 15 points I could have had. But
and then Torrey Horton, unfortunately, like, you know me, I'm one of the biggest Torrey Horton fans out there. I've loved what we've seen, like just big play after big play after big play all year, but I think this does squeeze him out a little bit. So, like, if you got him in best ball, you're still hoping that he can rip off one of those big touchdowns like he's been doing. But I don't think there's ever a point now with Shaheed in the lineup that you're ever going to feel good about putting Torrey Horton in yours.
Yeah, to me, Shaheed just opens things up, though, for the rest of the offense, because Cooper Kupp is very limited in what he can give you, and you're limited in what you've been using Torrey Horton for. And Shaheed can attack vertically, but also can create with the ball in his hands. And so that allows, if you've got Shaheed and Horton as the two outside receivers, now you're more comfortable utilizing Jackson Smith and Jigba in the shorter and intermediate areas, or you can have Smith and Jigba and kind of trade off with Shaheed taking some of those more schemed opportunities and Smith and Jigba working over the top. It just adds layers into what you can provide out of your receiver room.
Yeah, and if anybody's bored and they want some reading this morning, I wrote at length earlier this week about the Seahawks rebuild, if you will. It wasn't really a rebuild, but like they kept making these moves that like the fan base did not like year after year. Like there were a lot of questionable responses to them trading away Russell Wilson and then firing Pete Carroll and then moving on from Geno Smith. And as I was writing about this rebuild, it ended up just kind of transitioning into like a love letter to John Schneider for doing the right thing, even when it was difficult in the face of adversity, and like have just a masterclass in team building. I just absolutely love what the Seahawks have done over the last 4 years here. Pin tweet if you want to check that out and do some reading this morning. But Jeff, I think we're good to move on to the next game, right?
Yeah.
All right. Rams at San Francisco 49ers. Puka Nacua back at practice in full with this chest injury that he's been dealing with, so we should see him out there. Jordan Whittington not practicing with a back injury. Juwan Jennings, remember when he was on the injury report with an ankle, shoulder, and calf injury? Well, good news, the calf injury isn't listed anymore. Now it's just an ankle and a shoulder injury, so one of the 3 injuries is no longer plaguing him. Ricky Pearsall, man, still not practicing. This sucks. I hope we get some clarity here, but sounds like he might still miss some more time. Mac Jones practicing in full. Brock Purdy is limited. They said that they're hopeful that he can return at some point this year, but definitely weird vibes around around Brock Purdy. And then Christian McCaffrey, if you saw him get a DNP on Wednesday, no stress, just a typical rest day as he often gets on Wednesdays. So, Jeff, we need to talk about all these teams, but like the Rams are one of those teams that there's just really nothing to talk about. Like Matthew Stafford's QB1, Puka Nacua is a top 3 wide receiver, Devontae Adams is a wide receiver 1, Kyren Williams is an RB1. What else is there to talk about?
Yeah, I mean, Nakua's health is just probably the biggest thing. They're utilizing all these they have 4 different tight ends that are rolling through. So I think that if you're holding out hope that Terrence Ferguson takes over as the top tight end, it's not going to happen this year. So if you've got him in your league and you're holding that out in a deep league, maybe you could
Dynasty
probably potentially dynasty stash is a good way to term him, but maybe a good player worth acquiring in dynasty as you're coming here to the trade deadline, or if you should not have trade deadline. Dynasty, neither here nor there. Puka Nacua, you want to see a fully healthy game. Adams has really survived because of his goal line usage or red zone usage. We haven't seen heavy volume games going to Davante Adams. Maybe some of that's not being on the same page as Matthew Stafford. I think they're probably pretty close to being on the same page at this point of the season. I think some of it's just the way that probably coverage might be part of it as well, but very valuable in that goal line role. Talked about backup running backs that can be involved. I think Blake Corum is a backup running back that when the game script is right, he is a potential flex consideration. The 49ers can go either way on that game script being right, probably for Blake Corum to do much of anything. You're exactly right. Main pieces, you're playing Nacua, you're playing Adams, you're playing Kyron Williams, and you're playing Matthew Stafford, probably for sure in super flex, but depends how deep the league is.
What I want to say about Blake Corum too is I saw so many people talking about like the Blake Corum takeover. And I've said this on a few shows, and I'm sorry, I know it's going to annoy some people, but all that tells me is that you don't do anything besides watch Red Zone. For whatever reason, like Red Zone really keyed in on one Blake Corum drive, and then I saw all these people like, it's happening, the Blake Corum takeover is here. When if you look at the snap counts and if you look at the opportunity share, it hasn't changed at all from what it's been for the last month. Blake Corum's not taking over the backfield. Kyron Williams is still his backfield. He's still at 114 yards and a touchdown last week. Blake Corum is going to come in and spell him like every 3 or 4 drives. That's what's been happening all year, but there's not a takeover happening for whatever reason. Red Zone just wanted to show all of Blake Corum's touches last week and none of Kyron Williams. As for the San Francisco 49ers, Jeff, seems like we're still going to get, Brock Purdy's practicing in a limited fashion, but he's practicing like all season. Seems to me like we're probably getting another Mac Jones game here, right?
Yeah, no, the Purdy thing is curious to me because I don't know. We know the history of
Kyle Shanahan and
Mac Jones, but
yeah, I do wonder how much of this is Kyle Shanahan just like, look at me. You see this, John? You see this, John Lynch? Keep winning with Mac Jones. What it would have been like if we just drafted him in 2021?
That, or maybe they're saying we give Mac Jones extended run and we could end up with a very valuable trade asset here at the end of the year. Meanwhile, we let Brock Purdy have a runway to get fully healthy. They are winning games. We just talked about the Buccaneers. Maybe they can be conservative with Buccaneers because they're in first place by a couple games. So the 49ers, they're in a tight division, but they've been winning games in the playoff picture. So maybe that plays into it. But you would think that you would want your franchise quarterback that you've paid to be a franchise quarterback on the field. If he can be on the field, 49ers seem to be a little bit more conservative there.
So every once in a while, Jeff, when I set my rankings, you get this alert saying you are like, and you know this, you do the rankings too. It says like you are egregiously high or egregiously low on this player. And one of those players that I was egregiously high on this week that I don't really understand is Juwan Jennings. I ranked him as my wide receiver 21. His consensus is wide receiver 32. Why isn't Juwan Jennings being ranked as a plug and play wide receiver 2? Like when he's healthy, we see that he is clearly the guy here. Like, yeah, we saw those Kendrick Bourne weeks when Juwan Jennings was banged up, but when Juwan Jennings is healthy, he's the X receiver in this offense. I don't understand why he's being faded so much. Maybe you can talk some sense into me and tell me I'm crazy for still ranking Juwan Jennings this high.
Well, he's not been healthy is part of it. And then I wanted to pull up the numbers.
He's practicing in full. Like a full participant in practice. He's been a little bit banged up, but over the last couple of weeks, he's looked healthy on the field. He's looked like his old self. He's pulling the targets and he's practicing in full. To me, that tells me that he's healthy-ish.
Yeah, he had a touchdown last week, but 3 straight games at 4 receptions, averaging about 40 yards per game in those games. I think it's probably when you're looking at that tier of receivers that you're talking about, there are other players that you feel better about projecting heavier volume onto. I think what we've seen so far with this 49ers offense the last 3 weeks when they've had Kittle back, when they've had Juwan Jennings in the lineup, Christian McCaffrey's the focal point of the passing game. And then you're getting Jennings will get his 5 to 7 targets. You'll get Kittle's getting 5 to 7 targets right now, because I think they're kind of still getting him back fully healthy. Bourne will get about 3 to 4 targets. And then nobody else will get more than 1 target throughout this passing game. So you're not getting on the high end of the random 13 target game. You're not getting that so far out of any of these options. And you know that Christian McCaffrey kind of has stepped into this wide receiver one role. Kittle's there as well. So I think that that's probably the case pushing back against Jennings.
Fair enough. All right. Maybe I'm just an idiot. And I will say, though, I think the George Kittle thing.
So I'll be the idiot here on this. But.
The George Kittle thing. I remember a few weeks ago, like, remember there was a report that came out that, like, it wasn't even a report. It was George Kittle saying, like, I fully tore my hamstring. And I was kind of like, BS. No, you can't fully tear your hamstring. But I will say, like, seeing him since he's come back, he does not look like his normal self. And, like, that was an injury that he suffered in week 1. And here we are going into week 10. And George Kittle still doesn't look like George Kittle. I'm maybe believing that he actually did fully tear his hamstring and that like maybe he is just some freak that's able to come back from an injury like that, because he hasn't looked like himself. And it's frustrating. I mean, like, I'm at the point now, I don't think that I'd recommend benching Kittle because, his ceiling is still so high. But I think there's a lot of people out there who may have drafted George Kittle and then after he got hurt in week 1, looked at a Dalton Kincaid perhaps, or maybe they got lucky a few weeks later and they picked up Rondé Gadsden. Those are both tight ends this week that I do have ranked ahead of George Kittle. And I think if you're able to flex Kittle, maybe over a wide receiver 3 or running back 3 or something like that, it might be worth it. But Dalton Kincaid, Rondé Gadsden, of course, Tyler Warren, Trey McBride, Brock Bowers, who did nothing last night. Like, I have those guys ahead of Kittle where, I was hoping this guy would be like the overall tight end 1 this year. And now I'm kind of looking at him more in that like middling tight end 1 tier.
Yeah. I mean, that's where he's sitting. He's my tight end 7 on the week. And that might be
tight end 6 for me. Yeah.
Yeah. I think that being said, usually when we get the 49ers Rams matchups, that's Sean McVay and Kyle Shanahan would like to show off against each other. And it wouldn't shock at all if we've had a little bit of the Death Star is fully operational moment here with George Kittle. And he comes out here with 10 receptions and 135 yards in a big divisional matchup that usually tends to lean heavily on the offensive side.
Let's go on to the next game here. The Detroit Lions at the Washington Commanders. All of the Lions players are healthy. Well, fantasy relevant, at least, and they have been for the last few weeks, so that's really good to see. Jacory Groskey-Barrett had some dental work done over the weekend, limited on Wednesday, full participant on Thursday, so he'll be out there. Terry McLaurin still not practicing with a quad injury. And Jeff, I don't know if you saw this. Jaden Daniels, left elbow. We saw it fold in half in a primetime game. They're saying that it's not serious. They're saying that they aren't going to put him on IR. They're expecting him to come back. They said that there was no bone fracture, no ligament damage. It looked terrible. Like, I almost puked on my couch when I saw it happen, but the Commanders are downplaying it right now. Maybe this is just some gamesmanship, but we just got a report while we were recording the show from Ian Rappaport saying that it was not as serious as originally anticipated, and they will not immediately be placing him on injured reserve. So I think a lot of people were, I don't want to say hoping, but now you're kind of saddled with this where you feel like you can't drop Jaden Daniels. And if he's not going on IR, you can't put him in your IR spot either. So he's probably going to take up a bench spot for the next 3 or 4 weeks. Well, you got to figure that out. And like, I never like carrying multiple quarterbacks in, single quarterback fantasy leagues, but I think that's kind of what you have to do with Daniels now.
Yeah, we really need, Sleeper needs to have not quite IR, but also if they're going to be the O, you can just leave them there because let me
put Ricky Pearsall here. Why is Ricky Pearsall not able to be on my IR spot? Yeah.
Yep. You move them. They get the red O, and you move them, and you add that backup running back on Sunday, and then you got to move them back in order to do your waivers or in order to do your early lineups, and then you're just waiting for them to get the red O put back on. We need a in limbo status.
You got to drop Xavier Scott so you could move Ricky Pearsall out of your IR spot just to move him back to your IR spot and pick up Xavier Scott again later in the week.
Yep. Same over and over and over again. Daniels potentially ends up there. I think the Commanders have to be feeling, obviously they had very high expectations coming into the season, coming off of that NFC Championship game appearance, lost 4 straight games, now haven't really even been competitive in the last 3 games. And Daniels, we're not shutting him down, not serious. At some level, I can't help but wonder if that's trying to send a message to your team of hey, keep fighting. We're still in this. Your guys not done yet. But as you get into it, this is a very difficult game against a Lions team that lost last week and probably unexpectedly lost last week. You got the Broncos coming in 2 weeks. You've got 2 Eagles games left on the schedule. it's sure it might not be serious. Maybe you're telling everybody Jane Daniels might be back. I think that you might get into that situation where we recognize the season is over, and is it really worth putting Daniels back on the field when we've had just myriad injuries? Just kind of really feels like a lost year for Daniels.
Let's talk about the Lions backfield here, because last week was a weird one. The snap count, they were almost identical to what it's been all year, where Jahmyr Gibbs was getting 60%, David Montgomery was getting 40%. But what we saw last week was a very weird lack of efficiency from Jahmyr Gibbs. 9 carries for 25 yards, 3 receptions for 3 yards. I mean, just like not what you'd expect from Jahmyr Gibbs. It's just a fluke game, right? Like we've seen Jahmyr Gibbs through his college career, NFL career. We know he's an exceptional player. You're not having any concern about Jahmyr Gibbs going into this matchup, right?
No, I mean, before that, he was coming off his career high with 218
right.
yards against, just said, be careful about the Bucs run defense. He absolutely shredded the Bucs run defense for a career high scrimmage yard night. So I don't think I have any real concern for Jahmyr Gibbs. I think it was
a rhetorical question that I think just needed to be said out loud.
Well, if people need to hear that, then
I had people try to lowball me for Jahmyr Gibbs.
Jahmyr Gibbs is in your fantasy football lineups this week.
I had people try to lowball me for Jahmyr Gibbs and just like, oh, David Montgomery's taken over. Like the efficiency's fallen off. Like 40 points 2 weeks ago. What are you talking about?
And then a bye. And he had 0 points on his bye week, and then he had a bad game against the Vikings. So I mean, over the last 2, he's running back 52. So be careful here. I think it's the way we take in information and everything. But one of the things that I like to do at some point of the week is kind of, so sportsbooks will have, like, you can run down all the odds for anytime touchdowns just kind of in one list, and it'll list like 5 players for the first 5 players, and you'll have to expand more if you want to see more. And when I was scrolling through the list, they got to the Lions Commanders game, and they only show 5 players, all Lions, as like the odds for anytime touchdown, of like, you had to expand it just to see any commander to have odds in the anytime touchdowns. That's that funny. Probably
Sam Laporta more likely to score than Deebo Samuel this week.
Yeah, definitely. And it's some level of narrative game with the Commanders ending the Lions season probably in a shocking fashion for the Lions last year, coming off of a loss. I just think they're going to absolutely nuke the Commanders here.
Same. Let's have the Jameson Williams discussion real quickly.
Yeah.
Cat's out of the bag, right? Like, please tell me that Jameson Williams, after what he did last week, they're just going to keep feeding Jameson Williams. Like, John Morton told us, like, I have failed you, Jameson Williams. Like, you can't be more vulnerable and honest as a coach than saying that, or a coordinator. I'm sorry, but like, he says that he failed him. We see Jameson Williams get more involved. Then we see Jameson Williams doing what Jameson Williams can do, making spectacular plays, big touchdowns, tiptoeing down the sidelines, like feats of athleticism that few players in the world would be able to do. Please tell me this is what we're going to see from Jameson Williams for the rest of the year. You can't tell me that.
I saw the comments before the game from John Morton. I feel like earlier in the year we had similar comments from John Morton, and then we had a good Jameson Williams game, and then Jameson Williams disappeared for another couple of games.
Yeah. I think it's hard being a first-time play caller, and this is something I was on the couch with Sig earlier this week, and we talked about this. It's really easy in the offseason to say Jameson Williams is awesome. We want to get him the ball. But when you're sitting there with a play sheet and you've got 40 seconds to dissect everything that just happened and get your call down to the quarterback and get everything executed, it's a lot harder to make somebody a focal point when you've got Jahmyr Gibbs and Amon-Ra St. Brown and David Montgomery and Sam Laporta and all these guys that need targets as well. But I think in order for this offense to be at its best, you need Jameson Williams there, because he's the only deep threat in the offense. And if Jameson Williams isn't threatening defenses deep, they're going to pull the guys down. They're going to load the box, and we saw that last week. Amon-Ra St. Brown had a quiet game. Sam Laporta had a quiet game. We saw Jahmyr Gibbs couldn't get anything going because the Vikings knew that they could just load the box up. I feel like you need to have that threat of Jameson Williams working 30, 40 yards downfield to open everything else underneath up.
Yeah, and I agree with you. You're exactly right, and that's where, just open it up, just get him involved. I think one of the frustrating things when you look at personnel, the last couple of weeks, we had the Isaac Tisla takeover season, and then that's fully flipped back over to Khalif Raymond over the last 2 weeks. And the frustrating thing there is not like the mystery box appeal of Tisla. It's the Isaac Tisla as a run blocker outside, as the ability to stretch the field vertically and opening up Jameson Williams to be able to operate in some of the underneath routes. And Raymond doesn't offer in the same way that Tisla does the ability to be the field stretcher, which forces Williams into that role every single down, which limits his ability to be involved in the short to intermediate areas, which limits his ability to get free, cheap touches, which limits his overall ceiling, which limits his ability to feel involved throughout the game. It's all just, but you're exactly right. First time play caller. And this is a little bit more complicated than some situations where you can just spam Bijan Robinson and Drake London over and over again. You want to involve both running backs, and you want to make sure that your 3 key receiver options are involved throughout the game. And you're trying to balance all these things and your short clock and all those things of getting plays in.
Listen, if I'm John Morton, I'm going into this week, and the first thing I'm doing, like the first play on offense, is go a play action deep shot to Jameson Williams. Like, get that threat there immediately. And we have seen the Lions have done that in years past, where they will open up the game with like these deep shots. It kind of reminds me of the Chip Kelly Eagles. We used to see that often, like Mike Vick just hitting Deshaun Jackson on a 60-yard bomb on the first play of the game, and then it immediately for the next 59 minutes, you've got the defense playing on their heels because you punched them in the mouth on the first play of the game. And I haven't seen the Lions do that. Like it's just a very different offense than it was with Ben Johnson. It's a little bit more conservative. They've still got the pieces and they still feel like the Lions, but they don't have that oomph that we've seen in years past. And it's tough. Like it's tough being an offensive coordinator. I know there's a lot that goes into it, being a play caller, but I just want to see them like get back to the team that they were a few years ago. Jeff, anything else we want to talk about in regards to this game, or do we want to move on to Sunday Night Football?
Yeah, I mean,
I think we covered it all. Corey Krosky-Merritt. Do we have to talk about him? I mean, the volume. I mean, this to me feels like the trap game of all trap games for Corey Krosky-Merritt. Like, it's really easy to just look at the raw volume and say he's been getting carries, he'll bounce back eventually, but he is so game script dependent that if the Lions end up getting up on Washington, we see Corey Krosky-Merritt get phased out. Like, to me, this has all of the writings of like a 9 carry for 18 yards and 1 target that he didn't catch sort of game. Like this to me, this is a game where I understand wanting to start Corey Krosky-Merritt, but also like this could be a really bad game for him.
Yeah, is Corey Krosky-Merritt good? Like, that's
a question we might never have an answer to, that everybody's been asking since May. I don't know. I mean, so here's the thing I will say. The analytical efficiency profile for Corey Krosky-Merritt is pretty good. He's breaking tackles, which I like. He's generating yards after contact, which I like. I think the issue with Corey Krosky-Merritt isn't him 100%. I think it's the offensive environment as a whole, and also the fact that, like I said, he's entirely game script dependent because he is a 0 in the passing game. So if they fall into a trailing game script, he is just watching from the outside as Jeremy McNichols is out there getting the targets. So I mean, it's kind of like Derrick Henry in a way, except Derrick Henry is much better and he's on good offenses where the game script doesn't fall his. Like, Corey Krosky-Merritt can be phased out of this game by halftime.
Yeah, and I want to maybe look at the stats just real quick, but yeah, I mean, Chris Rodriguez is like exactly the same thing as Corey Krosky-Merritt. So
right, and he's getting more involved over the last couple of weeks.
And I think it's one of those that when you're in camp in the summer and we know the coaching staff's given up on Brian Robinson, but also you're looking at the other backs and you're like, oh, this explosive young guy. And then I think it's when you actually see it when the bullets are flying in an NFL field outside of that Chargers game. I don't know that Corey Krosky-Merritt has definitively said that he's going to be the running back of the future here for the Commanders. So that's a factor to the lack of involvement in the passing game, the Lions being a strong run defense. It's a spot that, yeah, sure, you can make the argument for volume for Krosky-Merritt, but Krosky-Merritt's gotten volume all season long, and he's like running back 38. It's just
as our
not
Sigmund Bloom likes to say, you can be right and wrong on the same player in the same season, and it feels like you have been right and wrong and right and wrong and right and wrong and right and wrong on Corey Krosky-Merritt since August. Like, it has just been a nonstop. Like, there it is. Oh no, it's not great. Oh wait, like, it has just been a nonstop just snip snap with Ja'Cory Krosky-Merritt. I think this is one of those weeks where potential trap. And like, I'm looking at my rankings right now. I have him pushed down pretty far. I've got him in the same tier as Alvin Kamara, who we talked about being a huge trap at this point, and Isaiah Davis, who is the backup to Breece Hall on one of the league's worst offenses. That's where I've got Ja'Cory Krosky-Merritt ranked this week.
Yeah, and we've already said that expect a blowout here, and we think Marcus Mariota in a superflex league could get you there in garbage time, basically. Yeah. And Chris Moore, Jalen Lane in garbage time could make a big play. But actively relying on garbage time as my plan A for playing a player in fantasy is never a place I want to be.
Yeah, just like you never want to make a hot dog. Sometimes it's just there and you're hungry. All right, let's go on to the next one,
Jeff.
Game
and it's nice and warm. Yeah.
Sunday Night Football, Pittsburgh Steelers against the Los Angeles Chargers. Darnell Washington, DNP on Wednesday with a foot injury, but practiced in full yesterday. Jonnu Smith got a rest day. Keenan Allen got a rest day. So mostly pretty healthy matchup here. There's a lot to unpack here. I think with the Steelers. I don't know, Jeff. You tell me, what's the thing that you want to talk about most in this game?
From the Steelers angle, we're 9 games into the season and we've just never seen DK Metcalf establish himself as a high volume wide receiver one, to the point now we kind of have to just recognize that this is what we've got with DK Metcalf. I mean, the 100 yards is in play in any game, but becoming the new Devontae Adams for Aaron Rodgers probably is not going to happen. And so that's part of it, just seeing the ball spread around. I mean, tight ends are all whack-a-mole. It's if you're desperate for any of these options. We've seen Kenneth Gainwell really kind of is the Kenneth Gainwell from Philadelphia, where he'll play about 35% of the snaps, not make a huge impact. Jaylen Warren, I mean, Mike Tomlin called him the feature back in the offseason, and we've really seen that come to fruition. So Warren,
Jaylen Warren ranked as a top 12 running back this week, and I think that might shock a lot of people. The production hasn't been great because he hasn't scored a lot of touchdowns, but he is getting workhorse treatment, and his efficiency, which, I'll be the first to admit, like I thought that like you give Jaylen Warren more work, the efficiency is going to fall off a cliff. His efficiency this year is better than it was when he was in that third down role. Like, he is wildly efficient and he's getting a lot of volume. We just need him to start scoring touchdowns. But like, one of my favorite trade candidates right now, like a guy that I'm trying to acquire everywhere I can.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that helps make football guys sharp in our content and what we're putting out there is our willingness to call out is not exactly the right way to say it, but in base camp, we can have some frank discussions about players sometimes. And I know I give a hat tip to Marl Tremblay on our staff, one of the projectors, because Marl got called to the floor basically on his Jaylen Warren ranking going into last week's game, where Marl had him as, I think it was running back 6 that he had him, and everybody else was kind of more running back 16. And Marl said, he's been getting heavy volume since he came back. That's where I'm comfortable in my projections, and he was right. He was
punches in 2 touchdowns. We see that regression hit.
Game, and you love when you see that somebody that puts themselves out there and supports themselves, doesn't back off of the take, and then they prove to be right. And so great job there. I think the charter side's a lot more.
Joey Wright had a situation like that a couple of years ago with Rashee Rice. It's a very good feeling when you kind of get called out for what you are being told is a bad take, and then it ends up being a good take. So shout out when that happens. It's a good feeling.
Yeah, I think the Chargers are way more interesting than the Steelers because we're seeing a couple of things with the Chargers where we thought we had a smash spot last week for Kamani Vidal, and then it was just couldn't get anything going. Maybe that was just a West Coast team coming east for a 1 p.m. game. We saw the Chargers in a similar situation with the Giants early in the season where they were really just flat for that game. They felt pretty flat for this Titans game. It might have been that, or maybe Vidal doesn't have the iron grasp on the running back position like we thought heading into this game with Jarrett Patterson as the backup that you want right now. So that's worth watching for the Chargers. The Joe Alt is definitely out, I believe.
Out for the season, yeah. They already declared that he is out for the season. They kind of rushed him back from that ankle injury, and then he re-injured the ankle, and that just shows how important he is. Like, he wasn't 100%. They said, we need him out there. And then they went out and they traded for Trevor Penning, which I think is decent Band-Aid. Like, he's an okay tackle. He's no Rashawn Slater or Joe Alt, but he helps a little bit. But yeah, man, like, if you just look at the surface level splits, what this team has done with Joe Alt and what they have done without Joe Alt, it is the best team in football and a pretty average team.
Yeah. So you've got that in potentially shifting up the backfield and what's going to happen here. Then you've also the wide receivers. It's you mentioned being right and wrong in the same season, and I think I know you were really on Trey Harris, but the Trey Harris people are turning out to be right. I think that the way that we're getting there is shocking to everybody because the expectation was that he's going to put Quentin Johnston on the bench and render Quentin Johnston completely irrelevant here. And the reality is it's been Keenan Allen as the guy that has been shifted out of that. They coming out of the Miami game, and it's really ironic because it was Johnston missing a game that allowed Harris the opportunity. Right. And Jim Harbaugh really praised him coming out of that Dolphins game for his run blocking ability. And it was Johnston that missed the time that got Harris on the field, but then because Harris got on the field, it's now Allen is the guy that's missing the time. And so Keenan Allen, that one, my only thing that I think I've gotten right this year, I did a round table for Matt Waldman about over a month ago, and Matt had asked who's a player within certain tiers that is unlikely to continue their production. And Allen was my player that I didn't think would continue the production that we saw early in the season. We've seen that big shift with Trey Harris, brings it in the run game, and
Keenan Allen Johnson. I don't think people realize it. Like he's a part-time player right now. He ran 24.7% of the snaps 2 weeks ago, 36.9% last week. And he's kind of doing the Stephon Diggs thing right now, where on a per route run basis, he's elite. Like he is, I had it pulled up here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7th in the league in targets per route run. The issue is that he's not running a lot of routes. So like when he's out there, he's still dominant, but you also see like he looks old. for lack of just to be blunt here, like you'll see him catch a first down and then he's like slow to get up and he signals the first down and then he just like slowly walks to the sideline after the play. Like I think the age is starting to catch up to Keenan Allen. He does not look like the Keenan Allen from 2 years ago.
Yeah, and I've been a little bit unplugged just with some things going on. So like I don't know where the consensus sits on Allen right now. But I know that things like this tend to be a little bit of a trailing indicator of when people really realize what's happened here. And I think Allen, when you're especially dynasty, but if you're a rebuilder in dynasty, this might be your last opportunity to be able to trade Keenan Allen off of your dynasty roster or even on a redraft league, to trade him off there because he did have that strong start of the season. We do see people more plugged in the start of the year. We do see those opinions from the start of the year tend to hold a little bit more weight than what's been happening recently. But I think it's definitely, Trey Harris has outsnapped him the last 2 weeks, has really established himself. And I think Johnston and Ladd McConkey definitely are not going anywhere.
I think that'll just about cover it for this game, Jeff. I don't think there's anything else that we need to talk about here. I will say in regards to Keenan Allen, I'm still ranking him as a wide receiver 3 because he does get a lot of the high value looks. It's on, especially in points per first down leagues. Like he's still getting some value from Keenan Allen there because they always bring him in on third down and he moves the chains. They bring him in the red zone. So I think even though we're looking at, like I said, Stephon Diggs, I think he's just like the perfect comparison. He's a part-time player who's wildly efficient when he's on the field. He can still score touchdowns, but definitely not the plug-and-play wide receiver 1 we had hoped he'd be through the first month of the season. So let's move on to the last game here, Jeff. Monday Night Football, Philadelphia Eagles at Green Bay Packers. This is always fun when these two teams get to face off against each other. Don't have any major injuries here either, which is nice. Reminder, we only get the Thursday practice. Teams who play on Monday Night Football don't practice on Wednesday, so we've only got the one data point to work with. But Saquon Barkley, full participant, coming off that groin injury that concerned us a little bit. Because remember, the Eagles also got last week off, so they got a bye to kind of rest up here. A.J. Brown practicing in full for the Packers. We've got Christian Watson coming off the knee injury, still limited, but we expect to see him out there. Matthew Golden dealing with the shoulder injury, limited as well. Dontavian Wicks dealing with calf injury, also limited. And then Josh Jacobs just with his typical rest days. So, Jeff, I think the first thing to talk about here regarding the Eagles would be Saquon Barkley. Like, assuming he's healthy, we're just plugging him back in as a high-end wide receiver or a high-end RB1, right?
Yeah, we saw it break open a little bit last week, and so you're hoping that continue off of there. I mean, you're definitely
the Giants fan. Yeah, we saw Tank Bigsby breaking it off too. I mean, like the Giants' run defense is just terrible, but sometimes that's what you need is just like that get right game to start feeling it.
Yeah, and I think it's just the shift overall that we've seen out of the Eagles offense, and really going back to the last couple of games, the numbers look a lot more like the 2023 offense before Saquon Barkley was put back into there. And it tells me two things. Of one, their confidence in Jalen Hurts is fully repaired from where it might have been when he was struggling to end that season. And then the other thing is they recognize that the plan from last year of let's just run Saquon Barkley and the lanes are going to be open because of everything we've got needed a pivot. And now because they made that pivot, now you've got defenses thinking about something else as opposed to the way they had probably broken down this Eagles offense the entire offseason. I mean, the Eagles win the Super Bowl. Everybody's breaking down the offense. How do we stop them? And they had a good game plan early in the season, teams did, to stop them. And some of that might have been the offensive line. Some of it might have been the dreaded amount of times that Saquon Barkley touched the ball. Some of it, I think, is just maybe the matchups. But I think in the second half, assuming that he's healthy, which is a big assumption here, Barkley does potentially line up to be that player that you drafted that can alter the outcome of your league over the second half of the year.
Yeah, and I think that sometimes, like, you talk about this all the time, like it's like a basketball shooter. Sometimes you just need to see it go in the hoop. And I wonder if Saquon Barkley flipping off that 80 yards, what was it? I mean, it was a huge play, like one of the first plays of the game. And you wonder if now he's like, that's right, I'm Saquon Barkley here, and you know, this is what I do. Like, you wonder if he's going to be feeling himself a little bit over the second half of the season. So I don't think there's a ton to talk about with the Eagles. The one last thing I will talk about is Dallas Goedert. I'm ranking him as a tight end 7 this week, like one spot behind George Kittle, but it feels like such a trap at the same time. Like his value this year has been so touchdown dependent, and if you look at it, the yardage per game is the fewest he's had since his second year in the league, when he was playing with Zach Ertz in his prime, coming off a 1,000-yard season. Like, to me, this feels so unsustainable, but they just keep using him with these creative little pop passes and shovel passes near the goal line, and, you know, like the fake tush push and then throwing the ball up to Dallas Goedert. Like, he's getting so much creative usage near the goal line that I can't ignore it. But it also does feel like we're just set up for one of those games in the near future here where you get 3 points from Dallas Goedert and you're like, what did I expect? Of course, this was going to happen to me eventually.
Yes, but then also he did have that game against the Giants where he got heavy volume and was able, and so he did volume his way to a good fantasy point finish. At least one. I
think, was it AJ Brown was out in that game, right?
I thought AJ Brown was active in that game. I
thought they were dealing with an injury. Yeah, AJ Brown. You're right. AJ Brown was active in that game. Yeah, they had, everybody was active. Yeah, AJ Brown and Devonta Smith were both there.
Yeah, it was the opportunity to prove Jeff wrong the next week, because I remember out of that game, I thought that we were in a position where Goddard should be seeing heavy volume, and of course, we immediately pivoted to Devonta Smith's been on a really hot run. I think that's been under the radar a little bit because he's been, like, over the last 4 games. The last time I pulled the numbers, it was something like wide receiver 3 per game over the last 4 games or so. So Devonta Smith has been really picked up his game. It was just the latest opportunity to prove Jeff wrong, probably, when the Dallas Goedert spike game happened and then falling out of it. So I think that the argument is there that there's a couple paths for Goedert to realize value. The Packers have allowed the 8th most fantasy points to the tight end position, so there's that in play. I think this game, I mean, weather could be maybe in play in this game, cold game here, but I don't know that that's a huge thing. I think the bigger thing is that this hypothetically should be a shootout potential game because, well, you saw it week 1 when these teams played in 2024. That was a big shootout game. Jordan Love, I think, is an interesting conversation, and Jordan Love in prime time is about 330 yards per game over 3 games, and Jordan Love not in prime time is about 210 yards in the passing game. So that's probably a natural jumping off point to step into the Packers.
Yeah, and the last thing I want to say, just I don't know if did you see the clip going around where there was a reporter in the locker room interviewing AJ Brown, and he asked him if he wants to be here, and did you see Devonta Smith in the background turns around with like the biggest eating grin you'll ever see? Like, it just had been waiting for that moment for somebody to ask. And of course, AJ Brown gives a very politically correct answer, I want to win here, and blah, blah, blah. But like, you could tell Devonta Smith is just like, oh boy, here it comes. It was I'll send it to you. It was a good one. But
you get the feeling. So I wanted to mention, we even talked about Kyler Murray or like Trevor Lawrence or some of these quarterbacks. And I think like you talk about Brian Thomas, maybe AJ Brown, like, I'm old enough that I remember the 90s NBA when you would have these like Kenny Anderson of like, this guy's a starting point guard, but also he's a pain in our butt. And I'll trade my pain in the butt starting point guard for your pain. Like it was like Terrell Brandon, Kenny Anderson, Stephon Marbury, Jason Kidd were like traded for each other every 6 months or so. I feel like we need to do one of these big spin shuffles with these quarterbacks and these wide receivers of make AJ Brown somebody else's problem, and we'll like go get Brian Thomas or something like that, and we'll do that. And
the dynasty brain in me says like AJ Brown for Brian Thomas Jr. in a second round pick. Like why didn't that get done at the draft?
Howie Roseman thing possible, or maybe AJ Brown's going to a third team and the picks are going to the Jaguars or something. But the Howie Roseman, that seems like I'll flip AJ Brown because he's a pain in my butt, but also I'll get a guy that's 6 years younger stepping into his prime, right. And that seems like something Howie Roseman would do.
All right, let's talk about the Packers real quickly here. And I don't think there's a ton to talk about. Josh Jacobs, he is practicing, so we expect to see him out there. We've seen a little dose of Emmanuel Wilson, but you're still starting Josh Jacobs as a plug-and-play RB1. Dobbs and Watson both kind of falling into that wide receiver 3 discussion. Matthew Golden, another guy that like just dropped at this point. There's no reason to keep rostering him. I think the question I do have, though, Jeff, is with the loss of Tucker Kraft, Luke Musgrave is a guy that the Packers clearly liked him enough to draft him before Tucker Kraft a few years back, and off the charts athleticism, very different play style. I've said he's more of like a Mike Gesicki, where Tucker Kraft is more of like a George Kittle. Like there's two very different archetypes of tight end here, but he is a guy that can run those deep vertical routes, like the post that we saw Tucker Kraft catching 30, 40 yards downfield, making plays after the catch. I think we could see that from Tucker Kraft. What we probably won't see are like the play action dump offs in the flat. I think those will probably go more towards John Fitzpatrick because he's just a better blocker. But Luke Musgrave, do you think he's a guy that can find a path to fantasy relevance with Tucker Kraft out of the equation?
There's definitely a path to fantasy relevance because Tucker Kraft was so involved in that offense, but I think that you're on the right track there of mentioning John Fitzpatrick, that John Fitzpatrick and Luke Musgrave have played about the same number of snaps this season. I think that we'll see probably, as opposed to Tucker Kraft being an every single down player and then rotating pieces around him, wouldn't surprise me to see those two tight ends kind of split that every down tight end role, and occasionally you'll have some 12 personnel. I think I like what your point on. I don't think Fitzpatrick is the guy that gets some of that underneath stuff. I can't help but wonder if maybe Savion Williams is a guy that gets schemed into some of those types of things, because we've seen some of those opportunities for him of that orbit jet motion that they do that scored a touchdown 2 weeks ago. Because I think that where a lot of Kraft's value comes out of is the tight end screen game or the chip and release a guy. If those schemed opportunities don't go to Williams, or maybe that's Matthew Golden's path to relevance, or I don't know if Jaden Reed's season is definitely over, but you could see Jaden Reed doing some of those things. I think Luke Musgrave, you're dead on terms of him being more of a downfield threat at the tight end position and kind of allowing you to invert that offense of, we're going to send Luke Musgrave down the seam and we'll bring Romeo Doubs underneath that, or we'll use Christian Watson in that screen game. That's my expectation. I don't know that you're going to get the cheap, hesitate to say it's cheap, but it is kind of cheap of we siphon 3 extra opportunities to Tucker Kraft because of these schemed touches. The big playability is still there. I mean, if defenses forgot about Tucker Kraft running downfield once every 3 games for no real reason, they're definitely going to forget about Luke Musgrave running downfield once in a while too.
And I think, another thing worth noting is that, we've talked so much about these teams that are switching to base 12 personnel. The Packers were one of those teams. And I think that made sense because on, Tucker Kraft was not coming off the field. And then on run plays, you get John Fitzpatrick in there, who's essentially an extra lineman. And then on passing plays, you can get Luke Musgrave out there. So I do wonder if this just changes their offensive philosophy as a whole. They were 5th in the league in their rate of running 12 personnel. And I think with Tucker Kraft out of the picture, they're probably not. And they might go back to being a little bit more of a spread offense and, getting I just talked about dropping Matthew Golden, but I wonder if this is, Luke Musgrave is obviously going to be more involved, but I wonder if this is the path to get, more 11 personnel out there and get more Matthew Golden out there as well. not a guy that I'm recommending starting by any means this week. I think the passing game still is going to run through Romeo Doubs and Christian Watson, but really interested to see. I mean, this is just a devastating injury, not just for fantasy managers, but also for the Packers. Like Tucker Kraft, we loved what he did in the box score, but also how impactful he was in the run game. Like so much of Josh Jacobs' success came because they would run Josh Jacobs to Tucker Kraft's side of the field, and he would just seal the edge every single time. So this is a huge loss for the Packers, and I am interested to see how they can, rebound from it.
Yeah, and digging into that personnel usage, Tucker Kraft is one of the very best tight ends in the league, and does give you that ability to be that every single down tight end, but also in concert with having that heavy 12 personnel look, is you lost Jaden Reed, and you didn't have Matthew Golden establishing himself, and so you were playing a lot of snaps with Dontavian Wicks or with Malik Heath, and so it's when you're pulling one of those guys or got kind of that, then you might be a little bit more willing to go to that second tight end look when you've got a healthy Christian Watson, you've got a healthy Romeo Doubs, and Doubs establishing himself as the nominal wide receiver one within this offense, and you lose Tucker Kraft, you lose that game-breaking ability out of the tight end position, then you're looking for the playmakers, and maybe Golden, you're right there. Maybe that is Golden's path, just as they're looking for production of having who do we have on the field here that's capable of striking fear in the defense.
Yeah, and their way that they played this year, like that personnel grouping, like I said, like 38% of the time they're playing out of 12 personnel this year. And that's one of the highest rates in the league. Last year, they were just at 25%, which was like league average. So there was a fundamental shift in how Matt LaFleur was, deploying his personnel this year. And they're going to have to shift that again now with the loss of Tucker Kraft. So we'll be paying close attention to that on Monday night. Jeff, any final thoughts before we sign off here? We hit the 2-hour mark. I'm sorry if I kept you longer than you wanted to be here.
Oh no, I'm never here longer. We didn't have the show in the middle of the week, and
exactly,
my week is not right. I've felt so off kilter about my week, just not having that window to be able to talk to you with things. And so,
and hand up, that was my choice for anybody who missed those early episodes this week. That was my choice. I stepped in and told Jeff, hey, we let's take a break off and reset. And we're going to come back next week with like some new show topics. Like we know you guys like the usage episodes and the risers and fallers, but we've got some new surprises for you next week. So be sure to subscribe so you can check all of that stuff out. But apologize to anybody who's waiting on midweek shows that didn't get them this week.
Yeah, and I think just seeing Quit Watch is going to be my thing this week, of seeing these teams that saw their best players traded, the teammates that were left behind, and what kind of effort is there, because we've seen it's been a running theme where, in last night's game was another example of it, where one side's not capable of pushing the other side. And so you might have a Buffalo offense going against Miami and thinking it's a smash spot, and the Dolphins aren't able to push them in that game. It's just leaves you a little bit feeling flat on what you could get in overall fantasy production.
Well, if you are a true sicko that stuck through for the entire 2+ hour show today, prove it by leaving us an Apple podcast review. It's the best way that you can help Jeff and I grow here. So if you're listening on Apple Podcasts, just write a quick review. It could be a sentence, could be a full paragraph. Let us know what you're thinking about the show. It's the best way to help us grow. It means a lot to us as well. So as always, thank you so much for tuning in. The show wouldn't be possible without you taking the time to listen. It really means so much to Jeff and me and the entire Football Guys community that you took that time to hang out with us this morning. Best of luck this weekend, and we will see you next week.